Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for a while now. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, most people I've told just laugh it off or say I was seeing things. But I know what I saw, and my friend saw it too. This happened about 2 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. I still get chills thinking about it. It was late one night, must have been around 11 or so, and I was driving my friend's truck from Anchorage to Fairbanks. We'd been on the road for a few hours already, and the whole trip was just dark and quiet. You know how it gets up in Alaska, especially once you're out of the city. There's nothing but trees and mountains, and the sky is so black it feels like you're driving into nothing. The only light comes from your headlights, and even then it doesn't reach far. My friend was in the passenger seat, dozing off now and then, but I was wide awake because I hate driving at night in places like that. Everything feels too isolated, like you're the last people on Earth. The truck was an old Ford, beat up and kind of rattly, and the headlights were poorly adjusted. My friend had mentioned it earlier. He said they pointed too low or something, so they lit up the road right in front of you, but didn't throw light far ahead. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was just focused on staying on the road. We were getting close to the Denali Park area, but it was the middle of the night. So there were no tourists around, no other cars, nothing. Just us and the endless dark. I had the radio on low, some staticky station playing old country songs, but it wasn't really distracting me. My mind was wandering, thinking about stupid stuff like work and what I was going to do when we got to Fairbanks. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something up ahead on the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a moose. You see those all the time up here, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. It was just sitting there, right on the yellow line in the middle of the road. I slowed down a bit, not too much because I didn't want to startle whatever it was, but enough to get a better look. The truck's lights were hitting it directly, and because they were aimed low, it was illuminated perfectly, like it was under a spotlight. That's when I saw it clearly. It was crouched down, legs pulled up to its chest, arms folded over its knees, and its head was down, like it was resting or hiding its face. It was covered in this long reddish hair, not fur like an animal, but more like human hair, thick and matted, almost like it hadn't been washed in years. The color was weird too. It wasn't brown or black, but a rusty reddish hue like old copper. My first thought was, is that an orangutan? But that made no sense. We're in the middle of freaking Alaska, miles from anywhere, and orangutans don't just pop up on highways. I felt this immediate jolt of confusion, like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I glanced over at my friend, and he was awake now, staring straight ahead, his mouth slightly open. He didn't say anything, just pointed, and I knew he saw it too. I was driving right next to it now, going maybe 20 miles an hour, because I'd slowed down without even realizing it. The thing was so close that if I'd rolled down the window and reached out, I could have touched it. That's what freaked me out the most, the proximity. It was right there at eye level because of how it was crouched, and I could see every detail. The hair was long and shaggy, covering its body completely, and it had these broad shoulders, almost human-like but bigger. Its skin wasn't visible, but the hair moved slightly in the wind, which was creepy because there wasn't much wind. It was just still, like a statue, but alive. I remember my heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I had this urge to just floor it and get away, but I was frozen, just staring. The thing didn't move at all, no twitching, no breathing that I could see, nothing. It was completely silent. And that silence felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced, like the whole world had gone mute except for the hum of the truck's engine. As I drove past it, I kept my eyes locked on the rearview mirror, half expecting it to stand up or chase us, but it didn't. It just stayed there, crouched on the yellow line, getting smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed it up. The whole encounter probably lasted 10 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Time just stretched out, and every second was burned into my brain. Once we were past it, I accelerated, my foot pressing down on the gas without me even thinking. The truck lurched forward, and I could hear the engine whining like it was scared too. I didn't say anything to my friend, and he didn't say anything to me. We just sat there in silence, both of us staring straight ahead, but I could feel the tension in the cab. It was thick, like you could cut it with a knife. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see something following us, but there was nothing, just blackness. My mind was racing. Was I tired? Had I been driving too long and started hallucinating? But I felt awake, more awake than I'd ever been. Adrenaline was pumping through me, making my hands shake. I glanced at my friend again, and he was pale, his knuckles white where he was gripping the seat. He looked as freaked out as I felt, and that's when I knew it was real. We both saw it. We drove for what felt like forever, but it was probably only 20 minutes or so until we reached Healy. There's a gas station there, one of those 24-hour places that's always open, and I pulled in without even discussing it. I needed to stop, to get out of the truck and breathe to make sure I wasn't going crazy. I parked near the pumps, and we both got out. The air was cold. It's always cold up there at night, and it felt good on my skin, like it was waking me up from a nightmare. But I knew it wasn't a dream. My friend and I stood by the truck, not saying anything at first, just looking at each other. Then he finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Did you see that?" he asked, and I nodded, too choked up to say anything. We went inside the gas station, and the brightness of the lights felt alien after all that darkness. The guy behind the counter gave us a weird look, probably because we were both pale and wide-eyed. We bought some coffee, more for something to do than because we wanted it, and then we sat in the truck without starting it up. That's when we talked about it. He described exactly what I saw. The crouched position, the reddish hair, the human-like shape. He said he thought it was a bear at first. But bears don't sit like that, and they don't have that kind of hair. We both agreed. It wasn't any animal we knew. Moose are big, but they're leggy and don't crouch. Bears are bulkier, and their fur is different. This thing had knees, like a person, and the way it was folded up was too deliberate, too human. We sat there for a while sipping our coffee, but neither of us could drink much. My stomach was in knots, and I felt nauseous. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, that silent figure on the road. We tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a person in a costume, but who would be out in the middle of nowhere, sitting on a highway at night? And why? It didn't make sense. Or maybe it was some kind of animal we'd never seen. But we're both from Alaska. We know the wildlife. Nothing fits. After about half an hour, we decided to keep driving. We didn't talk much the rest of the way to Fairbanks. Every shadow on the road made me jump. Every noise from the truck had me on edge. When we finally got there, it was early morning and the sun was starting to come up, but I didn't feel relieved. I felt drained, like I'd been through something that stripped me raw. We've talked about it a few times since then, but mostly we avoid the subject. When we've tried to tell other people, they just shrug it off or make jokes about Bigfoot. But it wasn't Bigfoot, not like in the stories. It was something else, something real and tangible and terrifying. No Alaskan animal has knees like that or hair that color, and nothing sits that still on a road in the dead of night. To this day, I can't explain it. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I catch myself staring at the yellow line, half expecting to see it again, and every time, I get this cold shiver down my spine, like I'm right back there in that moment, with that thing just feet away from me. It's a memory that stuck with me, eerie and silent, and I doubt I'll ever forget it. Story 2. This was back in October of 2020. I was 17, living in Forks, Washington. If you know anything about Forks, you know it's basically a dot on the map surrounded by an ocean of trees. It's green, it's wet, and once you get off the main roads, you're in the middle of nowhere real fast. My friend, he was 16 at the time. We'll just call him my friend. Giving his name feels weird, like I'd be dragging him back into this with me, and he's got enough trouble sleeping as it is. It was a Friday night, the kind of night where there's nothing to do in a town like Forks, so you make your own fun. For us, that usually meant driving out on the old logging roads east of town. They're these gravel tracks that cut deep into the Olympic National Forest, places where the trees crowd in so thick it's like a tunnel, even in the daytime. At night, it's just black. Your headlights are the only thing that exists. We'd driven out to this one spot we liked, a little pull-off that overlooked a steep ravine. It wasn't a view or anything, just a place to park where you wouldn't get stuck. We were just talking, listening to music low on the stereo, the engine ticking as it cooled down. I remember I'd just cracked my window a bit to let some of the stuffy air out. And that's the first thing that felt off. It was quiet. I don't mean normal night quiet, I mean nothing. No wind, no rustle of leaves, no crickets, no frogs, no owls, nothing. It was a vacuum. It was so quiet, it felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on the car. My friend noticed it too. He said something like, "Whoa, it's dead out there." We both laughed, a little nervous laugh. But it was that kind of laugh you do when you're trying to convince yourself everything's fine. We sat there for maybe 10 more minutes, and the silence just got thicker. I turned the radio off completely. The only sound was our breathing and the faint creak of the car settling. That's when we heard the first crack. It wasn't a random twig snap. It was a clean, sharp crack, like a thick branch being broken over someone's knee. It came from the tree line to our left, maybe 30, 40 feet away. We both froze. My eyes were glued to the window, but I couldn't see anything past the wall of darkness. Then another crack and another. They were rhythmic. Step, crack, step, crack. Something big was walking out there, and it wasn't trying to be quiet. My heart was starting to thump against my ribs, a hard, fast rhythm that felt like it was shaking my whole body. My friend whispered, "What is that?" But I just shook my head. I didn't know. A bear? But it sounded too deliberate, too heavy. Then we heard the breathing. It was low and wet, a heavy huffing sound that carried through the dead air. It was the kind of breathing you hear from a horse after a hard run, but deeper, with a gurgling undertone. It was close. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on my back, making my shirt stick to the seat. "Start the car," my friend said, his voice tight and high. My hand was shaking so bad I fumbled with the keys. I got them in the ignition, but I didn't turn it. I was just staring into the woods trying to see, and then I did. In the high beams, which were pointing off into the trees at an angle, something moved. It was just a shape, a massive dark shape that moved between two big fir trees. It was too fast to be a bear, too upright. It was tall, man, so damn tall. Its head was above the lowest branches. It didn't lope like an animal. It moved with a powerful, purposeful stride, and it was coming our way. That's when the fear went from a spike to a full-blown tidal wave. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was a primal, screaming need to get the hell out of there. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, way too loud in the silence. I shoved the car into drive, my foot stomping on the gas before I'd even fully turned around. The tires spun on the gravel, spitting rocks. I was frantic, twisting the wheel to get us pointed back down the road. I got us mostly turned when it hit. The sound was a metallic thunderclap. The whole car jolted sideways like we'd been T-boned by a truck. My head snapped back and then forward, my seatbelt locking and digging into my shoulder. My friend screamed, a short, sharp yell that was cut off as he braced himself against the dashboard. The car shuddered and settled, tilted to one side. I looked in the rearview mirror. My high beams were now pointing into the woods behind us, illuminating the thing that had hit us. It was standing right behind my car, one massive hand, if you could call it that, still resting on the trunk where it had slammed into us. It was huge. I'm not good with estimating height, but it had to be 8, 9 feet tall. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear. It was stringy and matted, a dark, wet-looking brown. Its shoulders were impossibly broad. But it was the face I can't forget. Its eyes, they weren't reflecting the light like an animal's. They were just red. A dull, glowing red like hot coals, and below them it opened its mouth. It wasn't a snout. The mouth was wide, and the teeth, they weren't fangs. They were blocky, like a person's teeth, but way too big, and they were a stained yellowish color in the headlights. It was panting, that same wet, heavy breathing, and I could see its chest moving. It roared. The sound wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't a bear's growl or a cougar's scream. It was a deafening, raw blast of noise that was part scream, part roar, and part something else I can't describe. It was so loud it vibrated through the car, through the seats, through my bones. I felt it in my teeth. The rear window, which was already strained from the impact, spiderwebbed into 1,000 cracks with a sound like falling ice. Then it moved. It came around the side of the car, fast. I saw its arm, long and thick with muscle under that matted hair, and it dragged its hand along my door. The sound was a screech of metal on metal. I saw the claws. They were black and left deep grooves in the paint and the metal beneath. It was scraping the car like it was trying to peel it open. I screamed. I don't even know what I said. I just slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, the engine screaming in protest. The thing was still right there, keeping pace with us. I glanced to my left and it was there, its red eyes level with the window, its huge body eating up the ground in massive strides. It wasn't running like a man, but it wasn't running on all fours either. It was a brutal, powerful gallop, and it was keeping up with the car, doing 20, then 30 miles an hour on a gravel road. It slammed a fist into my driver's side door. The whole car shook. The window didn't break, but it bulged inward, a network of cracks spreading from the point of impact. My friend was just yelling, "Go, go, go!" over and over, his voice cracking. I had the pedal to the floor, but the road was twisty, and I was terrified of spinning out. Gravel was flying everywhere, pinging off the undercarriage. The thing was still there, matching our speed, and it let out another one of those screams. This one was different. It was furious. It was a sound of pure, hot rage that cut through the noise of the engine and the gravel. It felt like it was directed right at me, a personal promise of violence. I don't know how long the chase lasted. It felt like an hour. It was probably less than a minute. My whole world had shrunk to the shaky circle of my headlights, the roaring engine, the screaming thing outside, and the smell of my own fear, a sharp, coppery smell. I was crying, I think. I could feel tears on my face, but my hands were glued to the wheel. Then I saw the intersection up ahead, the main highway, a tiny spark of hope. I didn't slow down. I wrenched the wheel, and the car fishtailed wildly, the back end sliding out as we hit the pavement. I fought the skid, overcorrecting, and we swerved across the empty oncoming lane before I got it straight. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind us was empty. The woods were just a dark wall. It was gone. I didn't stop. I kept driving, my body shaking so hard I could barely keep the car on the road. My friend was sobbing, curled up in his seat. We must have driven for 5 minutes before we saw headlights coming the other way. I flashed my high beams frantically, over and over. The other car, a big pickup truck, slowed down and pulled over. I skidded to a stop right next to it. A guy jumped out. He was big, wearing a jacket with a fire department logo on it, off-duty firefighter, we found out later. He took one look at us. Two kids, pale as ghosts, shaking, the car dented and scratched to hell. The rear window, an opaque web of cracks, and his face just went serious. "What happened?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I tried to talk, but I was hyperventilating. I just pointed back down the road we came from. In the woods, something, it chased us. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Get in my truck, now." We stumbled out of my car. My legs felt like jelly. I looked at the driver's side door. There were 4 deep parallel gouges torn right through the metal. The trunk was dented inward, and the whole car smelled like wet earth and something else, something musky and foul. The firefighter helped us into his truck and drove us straight to the hospital in Port Angeles. We were treated for shock and some minor injuries. Whiplash, mostly. I had bruises from the seatbelt. The deputies came and took our statements. They went out to look at my car and the area. They found large footprints, way bigger than a man's, pressed deep into the soft ground near the pull-off. They took pictures of the damage to the car. One of them told my dad it was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen. But in the end, the official report called it unsubstantiated. An animal attack, they said, probably a bear. They said we were lucky. We weren't lucky. That thing with its red eyes and blocky teeth, its scream that vibrated in your bones, it wasn't a bear. It knew what it was doing. It was trying to get in. It was trying to get us. The aftermath was almost as bad. The severe anxiety didn't kick in right away. It crept in later. I couldn't sleep without a light on. I couldn't go into my backyard at night. The sound of a branch cracking still makes me jump. I had nightmares, the same one over and over, of those red eyes staring in through my window. My friend dropped out of school for a while. He couldn't handle being around people. We don't really talk about it with each other. It's like this ugly secret we share that we're too scared to look at. I heard from some guys at the gas station that other people have reported stuff out on those logging roads since then. Strange howls that don't sound like any wolf or coyote. Broken branches way high up in the trees, like something massive was moving through the canopy. The area's pretty much avoided now. I still have the car. My dad wanted to sell it for scrap, but I wouldn't let him. It sits in our driveway, covered with a tarp. Sometimes, when it's raining, I'll go out and lift the tarp and look at the claw marks on the door. I run my fingers over the grooves in the metal. They're real. It was real. I don't know what it was. I don't care what anyone calls it. I just know that for a few minutes on a quiet October night, something that wasn't supposed to exist found us out in the dark, and it let us know, in no uncertain terms, that we were not welcome. And sometimes, late at night, I lie awake and I can still hear its breathing, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to park on a lonely road. Story 3. My parents had gone to some fundraiser dinner in town, which was a good 45-minute drive away. It was just me and my older brother, who was 15. He was planted in the living room, glued to some movie on TV, and I'd gotten bored. I'd been building a model spaceship at the kitchen table. The big overhead light was on, making the window over the sink into a black mirror. I could mostly just see my own reflection, a scrawny kid with messy hair, and the bright room behind me. I got up to get a glass of water, and I remember the linoleum floor was cold under my socks. I was just standing there, filling a glass from the tap, when my eyes adjusted past my own reflection. Out there, beyond our back lawn, past the first line of scrubby bushes, was the tree line. Our property backed up onto what felt like 1,000 acres of state forest. It was pure, deep darkness out there, except for the little halo of yellow from the motion sensor light mounted under the eaves. The light was on. That was the first thing that really registered. The light was on, which meant something had tripped the sensor. I remember feeling a little prickle on the back of my neck. I leaned forward, my hands on the cool edge of the sink, and I squinted, trying to see what had set it off. A deer, probably. We got tons of deer. Sometimes a raccoon or a fox would set it off too. But it wasn't a deer. It was just standing there, maybe 50, 60 feet into the trees. It was so still that for a second my brain tried to file it away as a weird shadow, a stump I'd never noticed before. But I knew those woods. I played in them every day after school. There was no stump there. Then the details started clicking into place, one by one, and my stomach just dropped into my feet. It was tall, unbelievably tall. Its head was above the branches of a young maple tree, and I knew that tree was at least 7 feet tall because my dad had measured me against it that summer. I was just over 5 feet, and the top of my head didn't even reach the lowest branches. This thing's head was above them. It was just looming. It was covered in hair or fur. It wasn't black like a bear. It was a dark, muddy brown, like wet tree bark. The fur looked kind of shaggy, especially around its shoulders and arms. It was built thick too, not fat, just solid, powerful, like a football player, but stretched out to this impossible height. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance and in that light, but the shape of its head was sort of conical, like a rounded point, and it seemed to be looking straight towards the house, towards me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I was frozen solid, my fingers gripping the sink edge so hard, my knuckles were white. This wasn't fear like when you watch a scary movie. This was a deep, primal, physical terror. It felt like every hair on my body was standing up. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping that I could feel in my ears. It moved. It took a step. It didn't walk like a person, not exactly. It lifted its leg really high, like it was stepping over something or like it was moving through deep, heavy snow. The motion was slow, deliberate, and unbelievably cautious. It placed its foot down without a sound I could hear. The silence was the worst part. The woods at night are never completely silent. You hear crickets, the wind, little rustles. But in that moment, it felt like the whole world had gone mute, like everything was holding its breath, waiting to see what this thing would do. It turned its upper body, its head still facing the house for a second longer, and then it started to walk. It moved parallel to the tree line, following the edge of the woods that bordered our property. It walked with that same high-stepping gait, its long arms swinging slightly at its sides. It wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't running away. It was just moving. It was so calm, so purposeful. It knew exactly where it was and what it was doing. I watched it take maybe 6, 7 steps. The yellow motion light stayed on, tracking its movement, painting it in this sickly, unreal glow. With every step it got closer to the deeper darkness where the trees grew thicker, and then on the next step it was just gone. It didn't duck behind a tree. It didn't fade away. 1 second it was there, a massive, dark shape moving through the trees, and the next second the space where it had been was just empty forest. The motion light was still shining on the same spot, on nothing. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been 5 seconds or 5 minutes. Time just stopped. I was still frozen, my eyes glued to that empty spot in the trees. My brain was screaming at me to run, to hide, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. It was like I was made of stone. Finally, I managed to stumble back from the window. My legs were shaking so badly I almost fell. I backed away until my back hit the refrigerator, and then I just slid down to the floor, pulling my knees up to my chest. I was breathing in these short, ragged gasps. I felt cold all over, a deep, internal chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the kitchen. The motion light was still on. It stayed on for what felt like an eternity. I just sat there on the cold floor, hugging my knees, staring at the window, waiting for that light to go off. It was my only confirmation that I hadn't just imagined the whole thing. As long as that light was on, It meant something had been out there. I heard my brother laugh at something on the TV in the other room. The sound was so normal, so everyday, that it felt like it was coming from a different planet. How could he just be sitting there, watching a movie, when that thing had just been standing outside our house? After a while, it must have been 10 or 15 minutes, the motion light finally clicked off. The window went black again, just my reflection once more. The sudden darkness felt even more threatening. Now I couldn't see what was out there. Anything could be standing 5 feet from the house, and I'd have no idea. I scrambled to my feet and ran into the living room. My brother was sprawled on the couch, a bowl of popcorn in his lap. "There's something in the woods," I blurted out, my voice way too high and shaky. He didn't even look away from the screen. "It's a deer, idiot." "No, it wasn't a deer. It was huge. It was walking on 2 legs. He finally glanced over at me, annoyed. It was a bear. They stand up sometimes. You're such a spaz. You probably just saw a shadow. I tried to argue, to describe the height, the way it walked, but he just shushed me and told me I was ruining the movie. I gave up. I went and sat in the armchair, pulling my feet up onto the seat, and I didn't take my eyes off the dark archway that led to the kitchen for the rest of the night. Every tiny sound from outside, the creak of the house settling, the furnace kicking on, made me jump. When my parents got home, I ran to the door and tried to tell them. My mom listened for a minute, then smiled this tired smile and said, "Honey, it was just a deer. You know how they look big and strange in the dark." My dad ruffled my hair and said, "Maybe your brother was pulling your leg, trying to scare you." They didn't get it. They weren't there. They didn't see it. I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep. I lay there with the covers pulled up to my chin, staring at my window, which faced the side yard. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every rustle of the wind sounded like that slow, careful footstep. That was the day everything changed. I was never really afraid of the dark before that. I wasn't afraid of being home alone. After that, I was. I became obsessed with the windows at night. I'd find myself just staring out into the darkness, my heart starting to race for no reason. I had to have blinds and curtains completely closed, sealed tight, before I could feel even a little bit safe. We had a dog, a golden retriever named Sam. He was the friendliest, dopiest dog you'd ever meet, but sometimes, late at night, he'd stand at the back door and let out this low, rumbling growl, the kind he never used for anything else. His hackles would be up, a ridge of fur standing straight along his back. He'd stare out into the blackness of the yard, tense and focused. Sometimes he'd whine, a nervous, high-pitched sound, and pace back and forth in front of the door. My parents would say it was just a coyote or something, but I knew. I knew what he was looking at, or what was looking back at him. A few times we'd hear things, not the normal sounds of the woods. This was different. Once, there was this incredible crashing sound, like a small tree being shoved over. Another time, there was this whooping sound. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a coyote. It was this deep, powerful guttural call that echoed through the valley. It made the air in my chest vibrate. My brother, for once, looked freaked out. He just said, "What the hell was that?" But by the next morning, he'd convinced himself it was just a weird owl. Years went by. I grew up, moved away for college, got a job. I never forgot that night, but I learned to keep it to myself. People don't want to hear that stuff. They think you're crazy. Then, one night, I was channel surfing in my apartment and I landed on one of those Bigfoot documentary shows. I was about to change the channel, but then they started playing this old film, the Patterson-Gimlin film, and my blood ran cold. There it was, the height, the build, the dark shaggy fur, and the walk, that same exact high-stepping gait, like it was moving through invisible resistance. It was uncanny. It was like someone had reached into my memory, pulled out that exact image from when I was 12, and put it on my TV screen. I felt that same drop in my stomach, that same primal fear, all over again. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a shadow. It was real. I had seen it. I tried to talk to my brother about it a few years ago. He's a logical guy, an engineer now. I brought up that night, and the documentaries. He just laughed. Come on, you still believe that? You saw a bear. Your kid brain filled in the rest. Those shows are a total scam. He wasn't there at the sink. He didn't feel that terror. He didn't watch it vanish into the darkness. I was there. I know what I saw, and sometimes, on a quiet, cold night when the wind is just right, I'll think about the woods behind my parents' old house, and I'll wonder if it's still out there, taking those slow, careful steps, moving through the trees like it's the only thing in the world that belongs there. And I get this chill, this deep, cold certainty that it is. Was Story 4. It was June 15th, 1964. I remember the date because it was the day after my cousin's birthday, and we'd all joked we were going into the woods to escape the heat and the leftover cake. I was 19, stupid, and thought I knew those woods in Hampton County like the back of my hand. We all did. Me and 3 other guys from town. We didn't have names for each other in our heads. Not then, not now when I think back. We were just a group of friends, a unit. The day had been hot and thick with humidity, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back 5 minutes after you put it on. We'd packed our gear, a couple of bedrolls, a cooler with some sodas and hot dogs, a cheap fishing rod, and headed out to a spot we'd used before. It was a decent clearing, maybe a half-mile from the old logging road we'd parked on, ringed by tall pines and a few oaks so thick you couldn't get your arms around them. We got the fire going as the sun started to dip, the orange light fading into a deep bruised purple. The fire was our center. It always was. We built it big, feeding it dry pine branches that snapped and popped, sending sparks swirling up into the darkening sky. The heat was a wall on one side of you, the cool of the night air on the other. We were just talking the way you do, about cars, about girls, about nothing important. The woods were loud with the usual night sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of something small in the underbrush. It was normal. It was peaceful. I remember feeling completely at ease, leaning back on my elbows, watching the flames dance and feeling the weight of the day's heat finally lift. The first thing that changed was the silence. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, draining away of sound. The crickets stopped chirping. The owl went quiet. It was like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the whole forest. I noticed it before the others. I sat up a little straighter, listening. One of the other guys must have noticed the look on my face, because he stopped talking mid-sentence and asked, "What?" I just shook my head and said, "Listen," and we all did. The only sound was the crackle of our fire. That deep, waiting silence is a feeling I can't really describe. It's not just quiet, it's a pressure. It's the feeling of being watched by something very, very big. Then we heard the first crack. It was a single, sharp snap of a branch, way off in the trees to the north of us. It wasn't a small sound. It wasn't a raccoon or a deer. This was a heavy, solid crack, like a thick limb had been stepped on and broken clean in two. We all froze, our heads swiveling toward the noise. We stared into the blackness between the trees, but our fire was too bright. It ruined our night vision, turning the woods beyond our little circle into a wall of pure, impenetrable darkness. "Bear," one of the guys whispered, his voice tight. We had black bears in South Carolina, sure, but they usually didn't come near a fire this big. We all clung to that idea for a second. A bear. We could handle a bear. Make noise, look big. We'd all been told that. Then the crashing started. It wasn't just one more step, it was a series of them. A rapid, heavy thump, thump, thump of something moving fast, and it was coming right for us. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It was plowing through the undergrowth, smashing through bushes, the sound of snapping branches coming so fast it was almost a single, continuous roar of noise. It was incredibly loud, deafeningly loud, like a tractor was driving through the trees. We were on our feet now, all of us, backs to the fire, staring into the black. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering. I could feel the pulse in my neck, in my temples. My mouth went completely dry, and then it came out of the trees. It didn't step out, it emerged. 1 second there was nothing but darkness and noise. The next, this thing was just there at the edge of the firelight. It was tall, so goddamn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be a head and shoulders taller than me at least. 7.5, 8 feet tall. It was built like a man, but all wrong, like a man who'd been stretched and packed with solid muscle. Its body was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear. It was long, shaggy and matted, a dark, muddy brown color that seemed to suck in the firelight. It stopped dead, maybe 20 yards from the fire, just standing there on 2 legs. I could see its legs were thick, like tree trunks. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, ending in hands that weren't paws, but weren't quite human hands either. I couldn't see its face clearly. The firelight flickered over it, casting deep shadows, but I got an impression of a heavy brow, a flat nose, and a mouth. It just stood there, completely still, and the silence came back, deeper and heavier than before. The only sound was the fire and the blood roaring in my ears. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl. It didn't roar. It just stood there looking at us, and that was the most terrifying part, the intelligence in that look. This wasn't some dumb animal. It was studying us. It was taking us in. I could feel its eyes on me, a physical weight. I felt naked, small, like a bug under a magnifying glass. I don't know who moved first. I think we all did at the same time. There was no shout, no run. It was a pure animal instinct that took over. 1 second we were frozen, the next we were just gone. We turned and ran. We didn't grab anything. We didn't think about the flashlights or the cooler or the bedrolls. We just ran. I sprinted headlong into the woods on the opposite side of the clearing, away from the thing. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I could hear the others crashing through the brush around me, their panicked breaths coming in ragged sobs. Branches whipped at my face and arms, scratching me, but I didn't feel a thing. The only thing I felt was a cold, clawing terror that started in my gut and shot through every part of my body. My legs moved on their own, pumping, stumbling, catching themselves. I ran like I'd never run before, fueled by a fear I didn't know a human being could feel. The woods were a dark, tangled nightmare. Without our flashlights, we were just blundering through the black, tripping over roots, slamming into trees. I fell once, hard, my hands skidding across the pine needles and dirt. I scrambled back to my feet without even a pause, my knees screaming in protest. I could still hear the others, but their sounds were getting farther away. We were scattering, each man for himself. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. It felt like seconds. My lungs were on fire, my throat raw. Finally, through a break in the trees, I saw the dull grey strip of the logging road. I burst out of the tree line and almost collapsed right there. One of the other guys was already there, bent over, hands on his knees, vomiting from sheer terror. Another one stumbled out a minute later, his face pale and streaked with dirt and tears. We waited, our chests heaving, listening for the fourth. We waited for what felt like an eternity, staring back into that dark wall of trees, expecting that thing to come crashing out after us. It never did. The fourth guy never came. We found out later he'd run in a different direction and came out on a road a mile away and just started walking until a farmer picked him up. We didn't say a word. We just ran for the truck. We piled in, the driver fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so bad he could barely get it in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he slammed it into gear, spinning the tires and throwing gravel as we sped down that dirt road. Nobody looked back. We drove all the way into town in complete silence. I sat in the passenger seat, shaking uncontrollably, my whole body trembling like I had a fever. I could still see it, burned onto the back of my eyelids every time I blinked. That tall, dark shape, those long arms, that silent, watching presence. We got to my house. I stumbled inside, went straight to the bathroom and was sick. My mom asked what was wrong, and I just shook my head and went to my room. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every little creak of the house making me jump. The next morning, in the harsh, clear light of day, it felt like a bad dream. But the scratches on my arms were real. The mud on my jeans was real. And the other guys felt it too. We met up at the diner, all of us looking like hell. We talked in low, nervous voices. We had to go back. We'd left all our stuff. Our parents would kill us, and we had to know. We had to see. So we went back. We took 2 cars this time, and we brought my dad's 12-gauge shotgun, which we laid on the seat between us like a holy relic. The drive out there was quiet. The bravado from the night before was completely gone. We were just scared kids again. We parked on the logging road and walked in. The woods looked different in the daylight. Normal. Birds were singing. Squirrels chattered. It was just a forest. It made the memory of the night before seem insane. Maybe we'd just spooked ourselves. Maybe it was a bear. We started to feel a little foolish. Then we reached the clearing. The first thing I saw was the fire, or what was left of it. It wasn't a pile of ashes. It was scattered. It looked like someone had taken a giant rake and just dragged it across the whole clearing. Charred logs and embers were flung 20, 30 feet in every direction. Our cooler was lying on its side, dented, the lid torn off. The few sodas that were left were crushed. Our bedrolls were shredded. The fabric was torn into long strips, like it had been done by hands, not claws. The stuffing was pulled out and scattered everywhere, clinging to the bushes like weird, dirty snow. It was a scene of pure, violent chaos. It wasn't an animal looking for food. An animal would have torn into the cooler, maybe dragged off a bedroll. This was anger. This was a tantrum. This was someone or something taking our camp apart, piece by piece. And then I saw the footprints. They were in a patch of soft, damp earth near where the fire had been. They were huge, I mean massive. I wear a size 10 boot. I put my foot next to one of them. My foot looked like a child's. These prints were a good 18 inches long and wide. But the detail, that's what I'll never forget. They had a clear arch, and they had toes. 5 of them. They were long, almost finger-like, and they pressed deep into the mud. The shape was human, but the size was all wrong. It was the foot of a giant. We just stood there, the 4 of us, staring at those prints. Nobody said anything for a long time. The shotgun felt useless in my hands. What was I going to shoot? A story? A footprint? We gathered up what was left of our stuff, which wasn't much, and got out of there. We never went camping in those woods again. We never really talked about it after that, not with each other, not with anyone. What would we say? We saw a Bigfoot? People would have laughed us out of town. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That silence, that crashing sound, that thing standing at the edge of the firelight, looking at us with the intelligence that wasn't animal. And those footprints. I can close my eyes right now and see them perfectly, pressed into the mud. A perfect, impossible detail that proves we weren't crazy. It was there. Something was in those woods with us that night, something that shouldn't exist. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me up some nights, is the way it just stood there watching. It wasn't scared of us. It wasn't scared of the fire. It was just curious. And then it got angry. I don't know why we ran. I don't know why it didn't follow us. I don't know what it wanted. I just know that for one night in June, back in 1964, we weren't alone in those woods, and we were the ones who were trespassing. Story 5. It was one of those perfect California afternoons in early September, the kind where the heat from summer hasn't quite let go, but the evenings start to get that little bite of cool air coming down from the mountains. My family had rented a cabin up at Lake Shasta for the week. It was my mom's idea, a last hurrah before school started back up. I was 17. That day, my younger sister, she must have been about 12, had gotten it into her head that she wanted to see this little secluded cove she'd heard about from some other kids staying further down the shore. It wasn't far, maybe a 15-20-minute walk from our cabin, through a thin stretch of woods that separated our bit of the lake from the next inlet over. My mom didn't want her going alone, so I got volunteered. I wasn't thrilled, to be honest. I'd rather have been out on the boat with my dad and uncle, but whatever, it was fine. The walk to the cove was easy. The path was well trodden, packed dirt and pine needles, winding between tall ponderosa pines and manzanita bushes. The air smelled like hot pine resin and dry earth. My sister was chattering away about some movie she'd seen, and I was just half listening, swatting at the occasional fly, feeling the sun on my arms. We got to the cove, and it was nice, quiet. She skipped some stones for a bit, and I just sat on a log, looking out at the water. It was all very normal, peaceful. After maybe half an hour, she got bored and decided she wanted to go back to the main dock, where our family's boat was tied up. She wanted to see if Dad was back from fishing, so we started heading back, taking the same path. It was on the return trip that things started to feel off. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment it began. The woods were quiet, not a normal quiet, but a heavy, dead quiet. The birds had stopped singing, the insects had gone silent. It was like someone had thrown a thick blanket over everything. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, that weird feeling you get when you know you're being watched. I shrugged it off at first. Imagination. Woods are creepy sometimes. Then I heard the footsteps. They weren't mine, and they weren't my sister's. She was a few feet ahead of me, her little sneakers scuffing lightly on the path. These were heavier, much heavier. A slow, deliberate crunch, crunch, crunch in the trees off to our right, keeping pace with us. I stopped. My sister stopped a second later and looked back at me. "What?" she whispered. Her eyes were wide. She'd heard it too. "Probably a deer," I said, trying to sound calm. My voice came out a little tight. It didn't sound like a deer. Deer steps are lighter, more skittish. This was a solid, weighty sound. Each footfall pressed into the ground like it meant it. We started walking again, a little faster now. The footsteps matched our new pace. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was staying parallel to us, maybe 20-30 yards into the woods. I couldn't see anything. The undergrowth was thick. Ferns, fallen branches, those scratchy manzanita bushes. The sun was getting lower, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees, making it even harder to see. My sister moved closer to me, her hand finding the back of my t-shirt, gripping a handful of the fabric. We didn't speak, we just walked. Our own footsteps now hurried and clumsy, while that other set of steps moved with an unnerving, steady rhythm. It was toying with us. I felt sure of it. It knew we could hear it. It wanted us to know it was there. The main dock felt like a million miles away. I could just see a sliver of the lake's blue water through the trees up ahead. Almost there. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. This wasn't an animal just wandering around. This was purposeful. It was following us. We broke out of the tree line onto the gravelly shore near the dock. The sudden sunlight was blinding. My cousin was there, sitting on the end of the dock, fishing line in the water. He saw our faces and stood up. "What's wrong with you two?" he asked. I was breathing hard, my chest tight. I turned and looked back at the wall of trees we'd just emerged from. The footsteps had stopped. The woods were silent again. There was something in the woods, I managed to say, following us. My cousin, he was a year older than me, a bit of a know-it-all. He smirked. "Yeah, right, a bear, maybe." "It wasn't a bear," I said, but I didn't have the energy to argue. The immediate terror was fading, replaced by a shaky, embarrassed relief. Maybe it was a bear. It had to be something, right? My sister was already pulling on my arm, wanting to get in the boat, to get out on the open water. We decided to take the small aluminum dinghy back to our cabin's private dock. It was quicker than walking the path again. My cousin came with us. The whole time we were putting along on the little outboard motor, I couldn't stop staring at the shoreline. The trees looked dark and impenetrable. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I just wanted to be back at the cabin, inside, with the door locked. We got to our dock, tied up the dinghy, and my cousin and I realized we'd left our backpacks and his fishing tackle back at the main dock. We'd been in such a hurry to leave, we just forgot them. My mom would kill me if I lost my brand new backpack. I looked at the path leading from our cabin to the main dock. It was a shorter, more direct route than the one my sister and I had taken to the cove, but it still went through a good quarter-mile of woods. "I'll go with you," my cousin said, his earlier smirk gone. He'd seen how genuinely spooked I was. So we set off, just the two of us. The sun was dipping below the mountain ridge now, and the light was turning that deep golden-orange color that means night is coming soon. The woods were deep in shadow. We didn't talk. We just walked fast, our eyes scanning the trees on either side of the path. Everything felt magnified. The rustle of a leaf was deafening. The snap of a twig made us both jump. We were about halfway there when we heard it again. Footsteps, but this time they weren't just following. They were closing in, fast. The sound wasn't just a crunch anymore, it was a crashing. Something big was plowing through the underbrush, not even trying to be quiet. It was coming from our left, from a denser part of the forest where the slope climbed steeply up from the lake. We froze. Our feet just stuck to the ground, my breath caught in my throat. We both turned our heads toward the sound, and that's when the world just stopped. The brush at the edge of the path exploded. Branches snapped like gunshots. Ferns were flattened, and it stepped out. It stood about 5 feet away from us. Just there. It was huge. I'm not talking tall, I'm talking massive. It had to be 7, maybe 7.5 feet tall. And it was built like a powerlifter. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and its arms were thick with ropey, defined muscle hanging down past its knees. They were unnaturally long. It was covered in hair, dark brownish black, like wet earth, and it was long and shaggy, but I could still see the powerful shape of its body underneath. But its face, oh God, its face. The hair on its face was shorter, more like coarse fur, and its skin was dark, leathery. Its head was kind of conical, and it had these intense, piercing eyes. They weren't black. They were a reddish-brown color, like old rust or dried blood, and they glowed with a kind of feral intelligence. They were locked right on me. It didn't growl, it didn't make a sound. It just stood there, its chest moving slowly as it breathed, and it stared at me with those horrible, knowing eyes. The smell hit me then, a thick, heavy stench, like a mix of wet dog, rotten meat, and something else, something foul and musky I can't even describe. It made my stomach turn. Time didn't just slow down, it shattered. I could see every detail, the way its fur moved in the slight breeze, the sheer power in its stance, the absolute focus in its gaze. It was studying me. It was looking right into me, and I felt completely and utterly stripped bare. All the courage, all the bravado I'd ever had, it was just gone. I was a rabbit staring down a wolf. I was nothing. My cousin made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was a strangled, guttural scream of pure, undiluted terror. The sound seemed to break the spell. The creature's eyes flicked toward him for a fraction of a second. That was all the chance we got. My cousin didn't think. He just turned and launched himself off the path, down the short, steep bank and into the lake. It was a desperate, flailing dive. I didn't think either. My body moved on its own. I spun around and leaped after him. The drop was only about 6 feet, but it felt like I was falling forever. The cold water was a shock, like 1,000 needles stabbing me all at once. I went under, my ears filled with the roaring silence of the lake. I kicked, clawing my way back to the surface, gasping for air. I looked back up at the bank, treading water, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. It was still there. It had taken one step forward onto the path where we'd just been standing. It looked down at us in the water, its head tilted slightly. There was no anger on its face, no rage, just that same deep, unnerving focus. It knew we were terrified. It knew we were prey. Then it moved. It turned away from us and looked up the hill next to the path. It wasn't a small hill. It was steep, probably a 45-degree incline, covered in loose shale, dirt, and thick brush. A human would have had to climb it on all fours, slowly, grabbing onto trees for support. This thing just ran. It took 2 bounding steps, and then it was sprinting up that near vertical slope. It didn't slip. It didn't struggle. Its powerful legs drove it upward with an effortless, fluid grace that was terrifying to watch. It moved like the hill was flat ground. In 3-4 seconds, it had vanished into the tree line at the top, the sound of its passage fading almost instantly. The woods were silent again. My cousin and I just floated there, shivering from the cold and the shock. We couldn't speak. We just stared at the empty spot where it had been. After a minute, maybe 2, we swam, numb and clumsy, to a neighbor's dock a little further down and hauled ourselves out. We sat on the rough, sun-warmed wood, dripping and shaking, not saying a word. We must have sat there for 10 minutes before we finally got up and walked on trembling legs back to our cabin. We didn't get our backpacks. We didn't care. When we got back, our parents were starting to get worried. We were soaked, pale, shivering. My mum started fussing, getting towels. We tried to tell them what happened, our words tumbling over each other, frantic and disjointed. There was a thing in the woods, huge. It chased us. We jumped in the lake. My dad looked skeptical. My mum just thought we'd seen a bear and gotten spooked. But then our neighbor, an older guy who'd lived in his cabin year-round for 20 years, came over to see what the commotion was. He heard us trying to explain. He listened quietly, his face serious. When we finished, he just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. He looked at my dad and said very matter-of-factly, "Yep, that's the Bigfoot. He comes around these parts sometimes, mostly just watches. Doesn't usually get that close, though." He said it like he was talking about a raccoon that kept getting into the trash, just a fact of life. That shut everyone up. The air went out of the room. He'd just confirmed it. We hadn't seen a bear. We hadn't imagined it. We had stood 5 feet away from a Bigfoot, a real, living, breathing creature that wasn't supposed to exist. It had looked at me, and I had looked back at it. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times in my head, the weight of its stare, the sheer physical presence of it, the way it moved up that hill like it was nothing, the casual, chilling confirmation from the neighbor. It changed something in me. It peeled back a layer of the world I thought I knew and showed me something raw and ancient and terrifying living right underneath. I don't go into the woods much anymore, and I never, ever walk alone. Story 6. I've been putting this off for a long time. Typing it out feels stupid, like I'm giving in to some kind of internet cliché, but I can't get it out of my head. It's been years, and I still wake up sometimes, my heart hammering, the smell of that place stuck in my nose. I need to get this down. Maybe it'll help. Maybe it won't. But here goes. So, back in October of 2018, I was up in the Cascade Range in Washington. I'm a wildlife photographer. It's not just a job for me, it's pretty much my whole life. I'd been planning this solo trip for months, aiming to document elk herds and maybe, if I was lucky, get some shots of black bear activity before they settled in for the winter. I'd set up a base camp not far from the Alpine Lakes wilderness, a place I'd been to before. It's rugged, beautiful, and usually it feels, I don't know, peaceful, like the world is still working the way it's supposed to. The first few days were perfect. Cold, crisp air, the kind that makes you feel alive. I'd gotten some decent shots of a small elk herd moving through a high meadow. Nothing spectacular, but good solid work. I was in my element. On the morning of the 5th day, I decided to push further than I usually do, into a steep, narrow valley I'd only ever seen on a topo map. The going was tough. Thick undergrowth, fallen logs covered in slick moss, the kind of terrain that chews up your boots and your energy. It must have been late morning when I found it. I'd been following a game trail that was barely there, just a slight depression in the ferns and huckleberry bushes. I pushed through a particularly nasty thicket of slide alder, my jacket snagging on thorns, and then the ground just opened up in front of me. It wasn't a natural clearing. That was the first thing that hit me. It felt manufactured, and right in the middle of it was this structure. I'm struggling to find the right words because nothing really fits. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing towered over me. It had to be at least 15 feet high. It was dome-shaped, like a giant, messy igloo, and it was easily 30 feet across. It wasn't built from rocks or anything. It was made entirely of trees and branches, big ones, not little sticks. We're talking saplings as thick as my leg, all woven together. I mean, interwoven. They were bent and twisted and jammed into each other in a way that looked impossibly complex. It wasn't a beaver dam. It was too high off the ground, and the engineering was all wrong. This was something else. My photographer's brain kicked in first. I remember thinking, what the hell is this? A weird art project? Some backwoods survivalist shelter? But it was too big, too permanent looking, and the silence around it was absolute. No birds, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of the wind sighing through the high peaks. I approached it slowly, my camera already up. The air changed as I got closer. There was a smell. It's hard to describe, but I'll try. It was a mix of things. A heavy, wet dog kind of musk, but stronger, more pungent. Underneath that was this sickly sweet odor of decay, like old meat or a rotted carcass. And there was an earthiness to it, like damp soil and compost. It was overwhelming. I actually gagged a little and had to breathe through my mouth. The structure had an entrance. It was a dark opening, about 4 or 5 feet high, leading into the blackness inside. I didn't go in. Hell no, but I crouched down and peered inside, using my camera's zoom lens as a kind of periscope. The screen showed a dark interior. There was bedding on the ground. It looked like a massive pile of ferns, moss, and branches, all matted down in the center like something big had been sleeping there. The whole place reeked of that same musky, rotten smell, only about 100 times stronger coming from that opening. It smelled like a lair. My heart was starting to beat a little faster now. Curiosity was still winning, but it was getting a shaky, nervous kind of curiosity. I started taking pictures, the whole structure from different angles, the entrance, the way the branches were woven. I moved around to the side, being careful where I stepped, and that's when I saw them, footprints. They were in a patch of soft, muddy earth near the base of the structure. They were enormous. I'm not talking about a big bear print. I know what those looked like. These were different. They were long, maybe 18 inches from heel to toe, and wide. They had a definite arch and 5 distinct toes. The thing that really got me, the detail that made the back of my neck go cold, was the depth. Whatever made these prints was heavy, seriously heavy. I placed my own booted foot next to one. My size 11 hiking boot looked like a child's toy next to it. The print was sunk deep into the mud, the edges sharp, like it had been made recently, maybe after last night's light rain. My hands were getting clammy. I took more pictures, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. The sheer scale of everything was starting to sink in. The size of the structure, the size of the footprints. My logical mind was scrambling for an explanation. A bear wouldn't build this. A moose wouldn't. There's no animal in North America that does this. I kept telling myself that over and over, but the evidence was right in front of me. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. At first I thought it was the wind. But the wind was up in the trees, a constant low shushing sound. This was different. This was closer. It was a rhythmic, controlled breathing. It wasn't my own. I held my breath to make sure. The sound continued, a slow, deep huh. It was steady, like something taking its time. It was coming from the other side of the structure, in the thick trees. Every hair on my arms and neck stood straight up. My blood went cold. I froze, just crouched there next to these giant footprints, not daring to move a muscle. My camera felt like a brick in my hands. The curiosity was gone, completely evaporated, replaced by a pure, primal fear. I was suddenly acutely aware of how alone I was, how far from my camp, how deep in this valley. I slowly, so slowly it felt like my joints were creaking, lowered my camera and turned my head just enough to look towards the sound. The trees were dense, a wall of green and brown and shadow. At first I saw nothing. Then there was movement. It wasn't the swaying of branches. It was a solid, dark shape gliding between the trunks. It was upright. I only saw it for a second, a fraction of a second, but the images burned into my brain. It was tall, so damn tall. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, sloping down to powerful-looking arms. It was covered in dark hair, maybe brown, maybe black. It was hard to tell in the shadows. It moved with a fluid, easy grace that was terrifying. It didn't walk like a man. It was smoother, more powerful, like it was part of the forest itself. It didn't crash through the undergrowth, it just moved through it. And then it was gone, vanished behind a thick stand of hemlocks. My heart was trying to punch its way out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. The controlled breathing sound had stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a heavy, waiting silence. I stayed frozen, my ears straining, trying to hear anything over the roar of blood in my head. I had to get out of there. The thought was a scream inside my skull. Get out now! I started backing away from the structure, my eyes glued to the tree line where I'd seen the figure. I didn't turn my back. That felt like a death sentence. Every step was a careful, deliberate placement of my foot, trying not to make a sound. I could feel my backpack brushing against a fern, and the rustle was as loud as a gunshot in that silence. I made it maybe 20 yards back towards the thicket I'd come through. When I felt it, I was being watched. It's a feeling you hear about, but until you experience it, you don't really understand. It's a physical pressure, a crawling sensation on your skin. It felt like a weight on the back of my head. I stopped, my body trembling uncontrollably. I forced myself to turn my head to look back towards the structure, and I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the trees, right where I'd first seen it move. It wasn't moving now, it was just standing there, watching me. I couldn't see its face clearly, it was too far, and the shadows were too deep. But I could see its silhouette, that massive, upright shape, broader than any man I'd ever seen. It was half hidden behind a tree, but I knew it was looking right at me. I could feel its gaze. It was an intelligent gaze. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was a knowing look. It was assessing me. That was the most terrifying moment of my life. That feeling of being completely and utterly exposed. I was a bug under a magnifying glass. I was prey. All my gear, my camera, my knife, none of it meant a thing. I was utterly vulnerable. We stood like that for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. It didn't make a sound, it didn't move, it just watched. That's when my survival instinct finally overrode the paralyzing fear. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I spun around and I ran. I crashed back through the thicket, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. I didn't look back. I just ran. I scrambled up the steep slope I'd come down, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I fell hard, banging my knee on a rock, and scrambled right back up, not even feeling the pain. The only thing in my mind was putting distance between me and that clearing. I don't really remember the hike back to my camp. It's a blur of panic and exhaustion. I just remember bursting into my campsite, my chest heaving, and immediately starting to tear everything down. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely collapse my tent. I didn't care about organization. I just stuffed everything into my pack, not even bothering to roll my sleeping bag properly. I was out of there in less than 20 minutes, hiking as fast as I could on the trail back to the trailhead. I didn't stop. I didn't look behind me. I just put one foot in front of the other, driven by pure adrenaline. The whole way, my skin was crawling with that feeling of being watched. Even though I was miles away from that valley by then, it took me hours to get to my truck. When I finally slammed the door shut and locked it, I just sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, my whole body trembling. Later, when I was safe at home, I went through the photos. The ones of the structure were clear, but out of context, they just looked like a weird pile of sticks. The footprint photos were blurry. My hands must have been shaking too much. There was nothing of the figure, just trees and shadows. People have asked me what I think it was. A bear? A hoax? I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know what I smelled. I found a Sasquatch den. I stumbled right into its home, and it let me know in no uncertain terms that I was not welcome. I haven't been back to that kind of remote wilderness since. I stick to more populated parks, easier trails. I lost my nerve. Some people might call that cowardly. I call it respecting the fact that there are things out there that don't want to be found. They have their world, and we have ours. And that day, for a few horrifying hours, my world collided with theirs. I'll never forget the sight of it standing there, watching me, or the sound of its breathing in the silent woods. It's a feeling you don't ever really shake. You just learn to live with the chill it leaves behind. Story 7. All right, so this is something I've never really talked about much, not even with my family, but it's been eating at me for years. I figured if I'm going to share it anywhere, it might as well be here where people get it. This happened back in 1979 in Jackson, Mississippi. I was just a kid then, maybe 17 or 18, hanging out with 3 buddies of mine. We were all from the same neighborhood, and on weekends, we'd usually drive out to this spot off County Line Road where there was this old pond. It was kind of our thing, just a place to get away from everything, listen to some music, maybe have a couple of beers if we could sneak them. That night, it was a Friday, I think, because we didn't have school the next day. The air was thick and humid, the way it gets in Mississippi in the summer, and the cicadas were buzzing so loud it almost drowned out the radio. We'd parked my beat-up old Chevy Impala right by the edge of the pond, facing the water. The headlights were off, and we were just sitting there, talking about nothing important. Sports, girls, the usual stuff. The moon was out, but it was kind of cloudy, so everything had this dim, shadowy look to it. You could see the outline of the trees across the pond, but details were fuzzy. I remember feeling pretty relaxed at first. The pond was usually quiet, with frogs croaking now and then, and the water lapping softly against the bank. But then, out of nowhere, we heard this low, deep growl. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a dog, not a bear, nothing. It was this rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the car seats and right into my bones. My heart just slammed into my ribs, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. One of my friends, he froze mid-sentence, and we all went dead silent. We looked at each other, and I could see the fear in their eyes. Nobody said anything for a second, but then someone whispered, "What the hell was that?" My hands were shaking, and I remember gripping the steering wheel just to steady myself. The growl came again, louder this time, and it sounded like it was coming from across the pond. It was so deep it made my ears ache, like when you're too close to a bass speaker. I don't know who suggested it, but someone said, "Turn on the headlights." My fingers fumbled for the switch, and when I flipped it, the beams cut through the darkness, lighting up the far side of the pond. And that's when we saw it. Standing there maybe 50 yards away was this huge, hairy thing. It was tall, like 8 feet tall, easy, and its body was covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the light. But the worst part was its eyes. They were glowing this sickly green color, like 2 little embers just burning into us. It was standing upright like a person, but its arms were long and swung loosely at its sides. Its head was moving slowly, kind of tilting and turning, like it was studying us. I felt this wave of nausea hit me. My stomach clenched up and I could taste bile in the back of my throat. One of my friends in the back seat let out this choked gasp, and I heard him scrambling to roll up the window, even though it was already up. The creature didn't move toward us, but it let out this grunting sound, deep and guttural, like it was talking to itself. The hair on my arm stood straight up, and I had this primal urge to get the hell out of there. We were all panicking now, talking over each other in hushed, frantic voices. "Start the car!" someone yelled, and I reached for the keys, but my hands were so sweaty I almost dropped them. I turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Way louder than usual, it felt like. As soon as the headlights went off when I switched them, everything went pitch black for a second before the car's interior light came on. That's when the thing across the pond let out this roar. I can't even describe it properly. It was chilling, like a mix of a bear's roar and something else, something ancient and angry. It echoed across the water, and I felt it in my chest, like a physical blow. My ears were ringing, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. I slammed the car into reverse and backed up so fast, we almost slid into the ditch. Gravel was flying everywhere, and I could hear my friends shouting, "Go, go, go!" I didn't even look back until we were on the road, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could still see those green eyes glowing in the darkness, just watching us. They didn't move, just stayed there, fixed on the car as we sped away. The drive back was a blur. Nobody spoke for the first few minutes. We were all just shaking. I had the heater on full blast because I was freezing, even though it was a warm night. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see it following us. One of my friends started crying quietly in the back seat, and another one was just repeating, "What was that? What was that?" over and over. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. We got back to town and dropped everyone off without saying much. I went home and didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those green eyes or hear that roar. For weeks after, I'd jump at every little noise, and I never went back to that pond. None of us did. We talked about it a couple of times, but it always ended with us agreeing to never bring it up again. It was too scary, too real. I moved away from Jackson in 1996 for work, but that night has stuck with me. Sometimes, if I'm out in the woods or somewhere quiet, I'll get this sudden chill, and it all comes rushing back. I've never told anyone else about it, because who would believe me? But I know what we saw, and I know how it felt. That terror, that raw fear, it's something you don't forget. And to this day, I have no explanation for what happened out there on County Line Road. Story 8. All right, so I'm just going to dive right in, because I don't even know how to start this without my hands shaking. I've been sitting here for like an hour, trying to type this out, and I keep deleting it because it sounds insane. But I need to get it off my chest. This happened about 3 months ago, and I haven't been the same since. My wife and my brother are still messed up about it too. We don't talk about it much because every time we do, it just brings back that raw fear, you know? Like your stomach drops and you feel cold all over. It was a Saturday, late in the afternoon, maybe around 4 o'clock. We were driving back from my cousin's place in Brooks County, Kansas. Nothing special about the day, just a regular kinda overcast fall day. The sky was this dull gray, and the air had that chill that makes you want to curl up inside. We were on 10 Road, which is this narrow, paved road that cuts through a bunch of farmland and patches of woods. It's not a busy road. You might see a tractor or two, but mostly it's just empty. I was driving our old SUV, my wife was in the passenger seat, and my brother was in the back. We were all tired, just chatting about nothing, maybe what we were going to have for dinner or something stupid like that. The radio was on low, playing some country station, and I remember feeling kind of relaxed. My wife was pointing out some deer she saw in a field to the south, and we were all just enjoying the quiet. Then, out of nowhere, she goes real quiet and leans forward, squinting. I glanced over at her, and her face was just pale, like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't scream or anything, just whispered, "What is that?" I slowed down a bit, thinking it was another deer or maybe a coyote, but then she said, "There's eyes in the trees, red eyes." And she was pointing to the west, off the side of the road. I followed her gaze, and sure enough I saw them too. Two bright red dots, way back in the trees. They weren't moving, just glowing, not like animal eyes reflecting light. These were different. They were too high up, and the color was wrong. It was this deep, almost bloody red, and they were just fixed on us. My brother in the back seat perked up and asked what was going on. I told him, "There's something in the woods with red eyes." He leaned forward, and I could feel the tension in the car suddenly spike. We were all staring now, and I had this weird feeling like we were being watched, not just by one thing, but by something else. The air felt heavier, and I rolled up my window without even thinking, like I needed a barrier. I slowed the car to a crawl, maybe 10 miles an hour, because I didn't want to take my eyes off those things. They were about 50 yards away, deep in the trees, but they stood out against the dark branches. Then, as we're creeping along, something else happened. From the west side of the road, this figure stepped out. I say stepped, but it was more like it glided or something. It was tall, like really tall, and it was white or light gray, almost the color of old bones. It moved so fast, crossing the road in 2 steps. 2 steps. I've never seen anything move like that. It wasn't running, it was just striding, but with this unnatural speed. Its legs were long and kinda bent, and it had this lanky build. I couldn't see its face clearly because it happened so quick, but I got the impression of something humanoid, but not human, no details, just this pale shape blurring across the pavement. My wife gasped, and I heard my brother curse under his breath. I slammed on the brakes, and the car jolted to a stop. We were all frozen, just staring at where it had been. The whole thing took maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like forever. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white and my palms were sweaty. Then, as if that wasn't enough, my brother pointed to the east side of the road. "Look," he said, his voice shaky. And there, maybe 20 feet away, was another set of those red eyes. But this time they were higher up, like 9 feet off the ground. 9 feet! That's taller than any person I've ever seen. They were just hovering there, staring right at us from the edge of the trees. No body, just those eyes glowing in the dim light. It was like whatever it was standing there watching us, and it was huge. We all knew it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears around here. They're big, but they don't have red eyes, and they don't move like that thing did. This was something else, something I can't explain. The silence in the car was deafening. No one spoke for what felt like minutes. We were just sitting there, engines off now, and the only sound was the wind, rustling the leaves and our own ragged breathing. I could feel the fear like a physical weight on my chest. My wife was trembling next to me, and I reached over to hold her hand. It was ice cold. My brother in the back was muttering, "What the hell is that? What the hell?" over and over. I kept my eyes locked on those red eyes to the east, and they didn't move. They just stayed there, fixed on us. It was unnerving, like we were prey being sized up. I remember thinking, should I drive away? But part of me was too scared to move. What if it chased us? What if there were more? The woods on both sides felt alive suddenly, like they were hiding things. The trees seemed darker, thicker, and the shadows between them looked like they were shifting. I've driven down this road 100 times, but in that moment, it felt alien, like I'd never been there before. My wife whispered, "We need to go, now." Her voice was so quiet, but it broke the spell. I fumbled with the keys. I'd turned the engine off without realizing it, and my hands were shaking so bad I dropped them. My brother leaned forward and picked them up, his own hands trembling. I could see the fear in his eyes, and he's not the type to scare easy. He's ex-military, seen some stuff, but this had him spooked. I started the car, and the engine roared to life, way louder than usual. It made me jump. I put it in drive and hit the gas, maybe too hard because the tires squealed a bit. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Those red eyes were still there, watching us go. They didn't follow, just stayed in place, and then, as we got farther, they vanished, like they were never there. We drove in silence for the first few minutes, just trying to process what happened. No one said a word. I could feel my heart still racing, and my legs were weak. My wife had her arms wrapped around herself, and she was staring out the window, but I don't think she was seeing anything. My brother finally broke the silence. "Did you see how fast that thing moved?" he said, his voice low. "And the eyes, what kind of animal has eyes like that?" We started tossing around ideas. Maybe it was a prank or some kind of optical illusion, but it felt too real. The way it moved, the height, the simultaneous sightings, it was coordinated, like they were working together. That's what creeped me out the most. It wasn't just one weird thing, it was multiple, happening at once, like we were surrounded. I drove faster than I should have, probably breaking the speed limit, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get home. The rest of the drive was a blur. Every shadow on the side of the road made me flinch, and every noise from the car felt like a warning. When we finally got back to our house, we all just sat in the driveway for a minute, not moving. It was like we were afraid to get out, like whatever was out there might have followed us. We went inside and locked the doors, something we don't usually do during the day. My wife made tea, but no one drank it. We just sat at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of it. My brother kept saying, "There's no way that was natural, no way." And he's right. I've lived in Kansas my whole life, spent plenty of time outdoors, and I've never seen or heard of anything like that. The rest of the day, we were on edge. Every little sound made us jump. I kept looking out the windows, half expecting to see those red eyes staring back. That night, none of us slept well. I had dreams about it, waking up in a cold sweat. My wife said she felt like she was being watched, even inside the house. In the days that followed, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a large bird or a trick of the light. But the more we thought about it, the less it made sense. The figure was too big, moved too fast, and those eyes, they weren't reflective. They glowed, like they had their own light source. And the height, 9 feet, that's not any animal I know. We haven't gone back to that part of 10 Road since. I take the long way around now, even if it adds 20 minutes to the drive. My brother looked up some stuff online, found stories about similar sightings in rural areas, but it didn't make us feel better. If anything, it made it worse, knowing other people have seen things they can't explain. What gets me is the feeling of being targeted, like, why us? Why that day? We were just driving home, minding our own business, and the way it all happened at once, the eyes on both sides, the figure crossing, it felt intentional, like we were being herded or something. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's how it felt. I've told a couple of close friends, and they just laugh it off or say it was probably a deer with some disease. But they weren't there. They didn't feel that cold dread wash over them. They didn't see how fast that thing moved, or how those eyes seemed to pierce right through the car. Even now, months later, I get chills thinking about it. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the headlights and my heart will skip a beat. But nothing like that day. That day was different. It's like we stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see, and it left a mark on us. I don't have any answers. I don't know what it was. All I know is that it was real, and it was terrifying, and I'll never forget it. We still talk about it sometimes, in hushed tones, like if we say it too loud, it might come back. And part of me wonders if it's still out there, watching, waiting. But I guess I'll never know. Story 9. It still doesn't feel real, even now, typing this out. My hands are a little shaky, I won't lie. I've been putting this off for a long time, just trying to process it, to file it away in my mind as some kind of bizarre hallucination or a shared stress dream. But it wasn't. It was real, and it happened right outside our back door. My wife and I were retired. We worked our whole lives for this, for the dream of a quiet house in the woods. No more city noise, no more neighbors 6 feet away through a wall. Just us, the trees, and the silence. We found this place online, a timber frame home in southern Washington. It was gorgeous in the pictures, all exposed beams and big windows looking out into a deep green forest. The sellers were in a hurry, said it was due to a family emergency back east. We didn't think much of it at the time. Who turns down a quick, easy sale? We got the place for a song, honestly, and we felt like we'd won the lottery. The first few weeks were everything we'd hoped for. The craftsmanship in the house was incredible. You could smell the cedar. Mornings were quiet, just the sound of coffee brewing and bird song. Evenings were peaceful. But there were sounds that didn't fit. We'd be sitting on the porch as the sun went down, and we'd hear this whooping. It wasn't an owl. It was deeper, louder, like something huge was calling out from a few ridges over. It would echo, this weird, hollow sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. Then there was the knocking, not like a woodpecker. This was different. It was this heavy, deliberate thump, thump, thump on the trunks of the big firs, like someone was taking a sledgehammer to them. We'd look at each other, my wife and I, and just shrug. We're in the woods now, I'd say. Got to be elk, or maybe a bear marking its territory. We wanted so badly for it to be normal. There was an old chicken coop on the property, about 100 yards from the house. It was solid, built from the same heavy timber as the house, with a good sturdy wire fence around a decent-sized run. It was just sitting there empty, and we thought, why not? Get some chickens, have fresh eggs, give us a little project. It felt wholesome. So one Saturday we drove into town, bought all the materials to fix up the fencing, which was a little saggy in places, and spent the afternoon getting it ready. We felt good, productive. That was the first sign that something was off. We came out the next morning with a bag of feed, just to see how it looked in the daylight, and the whole section of fencing we'd just repaired was just destroyed. It wasn't broken, it was torn. The heavy gauge wire was pulled apart, the posts were leaning way over, and the weirdest part was that it was all bent outward, like whatever did it was inside the run and just forced its way out. There were no tracks, nothing. The ground was just soft pine needles. I remember standing there feeling this cold little knot form in my stomach. My wife was just silent next to me. A bear, I said, but it sounded weak even to me. Why would a bear go into an empty chicken coop? And the force it would have taken to twist that metal. It didn't sit right. We fixed it again, this time with heavier posts and thicker wire. I even rigged up a motion sensor light on a nearby tree, pointed right at the coop. We were determined. We weren't going to be scared off by some animal. That was a Tuesday. The following Friday, we decided to go into the nearest proper town for a nice dinner, just to feel a little civilized. It was a good night. We had steak, talked about maybe getting a dog, just normal, happy stuff. The drive back was dark, the kind of dark you only get miles from any streetlights. Our headlights were the only things cutting through the blackness. We pulled up the long gravel driveway, the tires crunching in that familiar way. The house was dark and silent ahead of us. As we came around the last bend, the headlights swept across the side of the property and they lit up the chicken coop. The doors were open. Both of the big, heavy wooden doors were just standing wide open. We'd latched them shut. I knew we had. I remember clicking the big iron latch into place myself. My wife said, "Honey," and her voice was tight. I stopped the car, the engine still running, the headlights blazing right at the coop. The beam lit up the dark doorway, the splintered wood around the frame. It wasn't just open, the frame was shattered, like something had just blown the doors open from the inside. "Stay here," I said. I don't know why I said it. It was just instinct. I was pissed. I was tired of this. Tired of something messing with our property, our dream. I was going to go see what the hell was going on. I opened my car door. The interior light came on, and my wife grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered. Her face was pale in the dim light. I shook my head, pulled my arm away gently. "I'm just gonna look. I have the lights on it." I stepped out of the car. The night air was cool and damp. The only sounds were the tick, tick, tick of the car engine cooling and the thump of my own heart in my ears. I took one step, then two, squinting into the bright headlights, trying to see past the glare into the dark maw of the coupe. That's when it happened. It was so fast, but it also felt like it lasted an hour. Two shapes, two enormous, hulking shapes, just erupted from the darkness inside the coupe. They didn't run out, they burst out. The doorway wasn't big enough for them. I heard this sickening, sharp crack as the entire timber frame around the doors splintered and gave way. The doors themselves were smashed backward, one of them hanging from a single hinge, swinging wildly. They were silhouetted perfectly in the headlights. I will never, ever forget that image. They were massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and these things made me look like a child. They had to be close to 9 feet tall. Their shoulders... My God! Their shoulders were so wide, they seemed to span the entire width of the wall they'd just destroyed. They were covered in hair, this long, shaggy, dark hair that was matted and wild. It wasn't like a bear. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the legs were thick like tree trunks, and they moved with this raw, powerful grace that was terrifying. They froze for just an instant, caught in the full glare of the headlights. It was like a photograph burned into my brain. One of them, the one slightly in front, threw up a huge, long arm, shielding its face from the light. I didn't see eyes, I didn't see features, just this immense, dark, powerful shape that shouldn't exist. The smell hit me then, a wave of it, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something foul and rotten, like old meat and stagnant water. It was so strong it made my eyes water. That frozen moment lasted less than a second. Then they were gone. They didn't turn and run. They just vanished. They moved into the darkness beyond the headlights with a speed that was impossible. It was a blur, a rush of motion, and then nothing. No sound of crashing through the undergrowth, no snapping branches, just silence. I was still standing there, one foot in front of the other, my car door open, the interior light still on. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My body was locked up, every muscle tense to the point of pain. I could feel the cold sweat soaking through my shirt. My heart wasn't just beating, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drum. I heard a small, choked sound from the car. I managed to turn my head. My wife was in the passenger seat, her hands gripping the dashboard so hard, her knuckles were bone white. Her eyes were huge, staring past me at the empty, shattered coupe. She looked at me, and her face was a mask of pure, undiluted terror. I stumbled back to the car, fell into the driver's seat, and yanked the door shut. I hit the lock button. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key turned. I threw the car in reverse and backed up too fast, the tires skidding on the gravel, not stopping until the house was between us and the coupe. We just sat there in the dark, listening to each other breathe. We didn't say a word. What was there to say? The next morning, in the harsh, clear light of day, it looked even worse. The coupe was a wreck. The door frame wasn't just broken, it was shattered, with long, sharp splinters of wood pointing in every direction. The doors were smashed to pieces. On the ground, in the soft dirt just outside, were footprints. They were huge, easily twice the length of my boot and deep. The shape was all wrong, too long, with a weird splayed look. We just looked at them, then at each other. There was no more talk of bears. We called a guy with a small excavator later that week. We didn't explain why. We just told him we wanted the coupe gone, completely, and the hole filled in. He gave us a weird look, but took the money. We watched him tear it down, reducing the place where it happened to a pile of splinters and twisted wire, and then a flat patch of dirt. It felt like we were burying something. For months after that, the woods were quieter. The whoops and the knocks didn't stop entirely, but they got farther away, fainter. Like whatever was out there was moving on. We thought about selling. God, we talked about it for hours. But where would we go? Back to the city, and how would we explain it? We're moving because of monsters. We'd sound insane. So we stayed. We still live here. The fear has faded from a constant screaming panic to a low background hum, a permanent unease. We don't go into the woods after dark. We keep the motion sensor lights on all around the house. We understand now why the previous owners sold so quickly, so cheaply. They'd seen something. They knew. What gets me, what I lie awake thinking about sometimes, isn't just the size or the speed. It's that moment they froze. They shielded their eyes. They were startled by the light. They weren't mindless beasts. They were aware. They were reacting to us, and the sheer physical power it took to explode through a solid timber frame like it was balsa wood. That's not something you forget. It redefines your understanding of the world. You realize that the map of what's real and what's not has huge blank spaces on it, and in those spaces, things are moving that you can't explain. We never saw them again, but we know they're out there. And we know, with a certainty that sits cold in our guts, that the forest around our dream home doesn't really belong to us at all. Story 10. We were just driving, not really talking, just listening to the crunch of our tires on the snowpack. We'd been going up a low, sloping ridge, the kind you don't even really notice you're climbing until you're at the top. When we crested it, my dad just sort of let the truck roll to a stop. He didn't slam the brakes or anything. It was more like the truck lost its will to move forward. I saw his eyes fix on something off to the right, down the hillside. My cousin's truck pulled up alongside us and stopped too. That's when I saw it. The hillside sloped down away from the road into a big open meadow, and at the far end of it was a thick, dark stand of pine timber, so dense it looked like a solid black wall, and cutting across the middle of all that clean white snow was a track, a single clear line of footprints. But it wasn't a straight line. It started at the tree line, came down the hill in a long, arcing curve, looped around in a wide, almost perfect circle, and then went right back into the trees. It looked like a huge, lopsided horseshoe, or one of those omega symbols you see. A loop. Something had come out of the woods, walked all the way down, decided to do a lap, and then went right back where it came from. We just sat there for a minute, the engines idling, our breath making little clouds inside the cabs. Nobody said anything. The tracks were huge. I'm not good at judging distances from far away, but even from the road, you could tell they were way bigger than a bear's, and the spacing between them. It was a long stride, a really long stride. My cousin was the first one to move. He rolled his window down, the cold air rushing in, and lifted his binoculars. He's a hunter, spends more time in the woods than out of them, and he's got this nice pair of Steiner binoculars he's always proud of. He started scanning the tree line, following the tracks back to where they disappeared into the brush. My dad and I just watched him. I remember my fingers were cold, so I shoved them into the pockets of my jacket. The silence felt heavy. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. All you could hear was the soft rumble of the two trucks and the faint sound of the wind hissing over the snow. My cousin was staring through those binoculars for what felt like 10 minutes. He wasn't moving them around much, just holding them steady, focused on one spot near where the tracks vanished back into the timber. Then I saw his shoulders tense up. It was a subtle thing, but I know him. He went stiff, like someone had just poured ice water down his back. His knuckles, where he was holding the binoculars, were white. He slowly lowered the binoculars and turned to look at us. His face had lost all its color. He looked pale, waxy, like he was about to be sick. He rolled his window up, and for a second he just sat there in his truck, staring straight ahead. Then he looked over at my dad and me, and he made this little motion with his hand, a come here gesture. My dad put our truck in park but left it running. "Stay here," he said to me, his voice low and tight. He got out and walked over to my cousin's window. I saw him lean in, and my cousin started talking, his head close to my dad's. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I saw my dad's back straighten. He stood there for a minute, just listening. Then he nodded once, a short, sharp movement, and walked back to our truck. When he opened the door and got back in, the cold that came with him felt different. It felt dangerous. He didn't look at me. He just stared out the windshield at that hillside. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard I could see the tendons standing out. "Dad?" I said. My voice sounded small. He took a deep breath like it was hard to get air. "He saw it," my dad said, and his voice was a dry rasp. "He saw something. In the trees. Right where the tracks go in." My stomach dropped. It wasn't a surprise, not really, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. What was it? My dad finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were wide, with more pure fear in them than I'd ever seen in my life. This is a man who's been charged by a moose and didn't flinch. He said it was big, taller than any man, covered in dark hair like a bear, but it was standing on two legs, just standing there, partly hidden by a big pine. It was watching us. The air went out of me. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck, under my hair. I looked over at the tree line. It was just a dark smudge from here, but now it felt like 1,000 eyes were staring back. That feeling of being watched. It's not something you imagine. It's a physical pressure, a prickle on your skin. And right then I felt it. We all felt it. My cousin's description wasn't some movie monster. It was worse because it was so simple, a big, dark, hairy thing, standing on two legs, just watching. He said the way it stood was wrong. It wasn't stiff like a man pretending to be an ape. It was relaxed, natural, its arms hanging at its sides. He said through the binoculars, for one horrible second, he thought he saw its eyes. He said they weren't animal eyes, they were intelligent. They were looking right back at him, and they knew he was there. We just sat, the three of us, in two separate trucks, frozen on that ridge. We didn't get out. The idea of opening those doors, of letting that silence in, of stepping out into the open, it was unthinkable. It felt like the second our feet touched that snow, whatever was in those trees would come out. The tracks were a message, a "I was here" sign, and my cousin had just seen the one who left it, and it was still home. I kept staring at that omega loop in the snow. Why did it do that? Why come out, walk all that way just to turn around and go back? It wasn't foraging. It wasn't traveling in a straight line. It was like it was patrolling, marking its territory. Or maybe it was just curious. It heard our trucks coming and came out to take a look, and then went back to cover to watch us. The thought made my skin crawl. The longer we sat, the more the fear set in. It wasn't a jump scare kind of fear. It was a deep, cold, sinking feeling in my gut. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of something that shouldn't exist, but clearly did. It was the fear that all the rules of the woods that I thought I knew were wrong. My dad's hand went to the gear shift. He didn't say a word. He just put the truck in reverse and started backing up slowly, carefully. My cousin in his Chevy did the same. We didn't turn around. We just backed down that ridge, keeping our trucks pointed at the hillside, our eyes glued to that tree line. We backed up for what felt like a mile, until the ridge blocked our view of the meadow and the tracks. Only then, on a wider part of the road, did we both do a clumsy three-point turn, our tires skidding a little in the snow, and then we drove. We didn't speed, but we didn't linger either. We just got out of there. We didn't talk about it on the way home. What was there to say? We had all seen the tracks. We had all heard my cousin's description. We had all felt that oppressive, silent watchfulness from the woods. We never went back to that specific hillside, not for hunting, not for fishing, not for anything. My cousin sold his property out that way a couple of years later. He never said it was because of that day, but I knew, we all knew. That was years ago now. I've told very few people about it. Most just smile and nod. But I know what we saw. I know what my cousin saw through those binoculars. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else. Something that lives in the deep timber and sometimes, for reasons we'll never understand, leaves a perfect looping signature in the snow just to let you know it's there. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, it stays to watch you read it. The memory of that morning, of the tracks, of my cousin's pale, terrified face, and of that feeling of being watched by something ancient and powerful and utterly unknown, is something that never, ever leaves you. The woods never feel the same after that. They just feel occupied. Story 11. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about online before. But I've been reading through this forum for a while now and figured it's time to just put it out there. This happened to me back in March of 1982. I need to say the year like that because even now, all these years later, it feels like a different lifetime, but the memory is so sharp it could have been yesterday. I was working on a dairy farm situated right between Deersville and Tippecanoe in Harrison County, Ohio. It wasn't my farm. I was just hired help, a young guy in his 20s trying to make some money. The work was hard, but it was simple and I liked the quiet. That morning was one of those late winter mornings that hasn't decided if it wants to be spring yet. There was a frost, the kind that coats every single blade of grass and twig, making the whole world look like it was dusted with glass. The air was so cold, it hurt to breathe deeply, and every puff of my breath hung in front of my face like a little cloud. My job that morning, like every morning, was to feed the cattle. It was early. The sun was just starting to think about rising, so the world was that weird, flat, grey colour, not quite dark, but not light either. I was out by the feed troughs, heaving a heavy sack of grain, the burlap rough against my gloves. I was pouring it out, the grain making a rustling, rattling sound as it hit the bottom of the metal trough. The cattle were starting to amble over, their big, dumb, gentle faces looking for breakfast. Everything was normal. It was so perfectly, boringly normal, and then I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It was low, a deep grunt that came from over by the creek that bordered the north end of the pasture. The sound didn't fit. It wasn't a cow, wasn't a deer. It was something else. It was a sound that came from a chest way bigger than any man's. I froze, my hands still on the grain sack, and I looked up. About 50 yards away, right where the tree line started near the creek, there was a figure. It was standing up. For a second, my brain tried to make it into a man, maybe another farmhand or a hunter who'd gotten lost. But it was all wrong. The proportions were off. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. I'd guess it was around 7 feet tall, but it was so broad, so thick, that the height was almost secondary to the sheer mass of it. It was just standing there, half turned away from me, looking into the trees. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was dark, almost black, and it looked stringy, like long, shaggy hair that was wet and matted. The light was bad, but I could see the muscle definition in its back and shoulders through the hair. It was built like a power lifter, but raw, like something that had never seen the inside of a gym. The terror didn't hit me all at once. It started as a cold knot in my stomach, a feeling of pure, primal wrongness. This thing did not belong in my world. My heart started thudding against my ribs, a hard, painful rhythm. I couldn't move. I was just frozen, staring. And then it turned its head. I didn't see its face clearly. It was more of a profile, a dark shape. But I saw the movement, the swing of its head in my direction. It knew I was there. I felt it. It was a physical sensation, like a pressure change in the air. We stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, me and this thing locked in that frozen moment. Then it turned its whole body and started to walk away, towards the creek and the woods beyond. This is the part that's burned into my brain. The sound. The ground was covered in that white frost, and as it walked, its feet, and they were big. I couldn't see the shape, but I could see the size, crunch through the frost. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It wasn't a delicate sound. It was a heavy, deliberate, powerful crunch with every step. It wasn't in a hurry. It just walked, like it owned the land and knew it. Then it reached the old barbed wire fence that separates the pasture from the woods. That fence is sturdy. It has to be to hold cattle back. This thing didn't climb it. It didn't break it. It just stepped over it. And as it put its weight on the top wire, the fence post groaned and the wire let out this high-pitched metal squeak. I heard that squeak as clear as I hear my own voice now. The sound of that fence complaining under its weight made my blood run cold. It was a sound that gave a number to its mass, a physical measurement of how impossibly heavy and strong it was. And the whole time, the cattle. This is what gets me. The cattle. They had been milling around me waiting for food. When this thing appeared and walked away, they didn't panic, they didn't run. A couple of them lifted their heads and looked in its direction, then went back to nosing the ground for spilled grain. They were completely unbothered. That scared me almost as much as the thing itself. If it had been a bear or a wolf or a man, the cattle would have been spooked. They acted like it was just another part of the landscape, like they knew it, like it belonged. Then it was gone. It just melted into the tree line, and the crunching footsteps stopped. The world was silent again, except for the soft lowing of the cows and the blood pounding in my ears. I don't know how long I stood there. The grain sack was still in my hands. My fingers were cramping from how hard I was gripping it. I finally let it drop to the ground. My legs felt like jelly. I had to lean against the trough for a minute because I thought I was going to fall over. I was shaking, a full-body tremble that I couldn't control. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep, systemic shock. My reality had just been cracked open. The rest of the morning was a blur. I went through the motions of the milking. My hands were still unsteady, and I kept looking over my shoulder towards the creek. Every shadow felt like it was moving. Every normal sound, a bird, a branch cracking in the woods, made me jump. The other guys on the farm must have thought I was sick or hungover. I couldn't talk. I just nodded and kept my head down. How do you say, "Hey, I just saw a 7-foot-tall hairy monster step over a fence like it was nothing," without sounding completely insane? After the milking was done and the sun was fully up, the frost had melted away, leaving the grass wet and green. I knew I had to go look. I had to see if there was any proof. I walked over to the creek, my heart back to hammering in my chest. The place where it had stood was just mud and trampled grass now. I went to the fence. I looked at the ground on both sides. Nothing. The frost was gone, and the ground was too soft and wet to hold a clear print. I ran my hand over the top barbed wire. It was just a cold, wet piece of metal. There was no sign, no giant footprint in the mud, no hair caught on the barbs. Nothing. It was the most frustrating, terrifying feeling. I had seen it. I had heard it. I knew it was real, but there was nothing left to show for it. If I told anyone, I'd be the guy who saw a monster. So I didn't. I kept it to myself, but that wasn't the end of it. That morning was just the beginning of knowing. A few years later, I took up bow hunting. I liked the silence of it, being in the woods before dawn. I found myself drawn back to that same general area, the woods around that farm. Maybe some part of me was trying to understand. Or maybe I was just trying to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I've been in those woods dozens of times since, and most times it's just normal woods. But there have been a few times that made the hair on my arms stand up. Once, I was perched in my tree stand just before first light. It was dead quiet, that heavy silence of a forest holding its breath. Then, from maybe a couple hundred yards away, came a scream. It wasn't a fox or a rabbit. It wasn't a bobcat. I've heard all those. This was different. It was a roar and a scream mixed together, a raw, guttural, furious sound that echoed through the trees. It was so loud, so full of power, that it felt like the sound was vibrating in my own chest. I grabbed my bow so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't move a muscle for what felt like an hour. I didn't hear it again, but I didn't need to. I knew. Another time, I was walking out at dusk, following a deer trail. I heard what sounded like thick branches being broken, not snapped, but wrenched apart. Crack, crack, like something was just tearing small trees in half. It was close, too close. I stopped walking and just listened. Then I heard a heavy thump, thump, thump sound, like something big was beating on a tree trunk with its hands. It wasn't a woodpecker. This was a deep, percussive thud that you could feel in the ground. I didn't wait around to see what it was. I turned around and walked out of there as fast and as quietly as I could, my skin crawling the whole way. Those later experiences, the screams and the sounds, they didn't scare me in the same way as that first morning. That first sighting was pure, undiluted terror. The later stuff was different. It was a confirmation. It was a cold, sinking feeling of knowing that what I saw by the creek that frosty morning was real, and it was still out there. It reinforced the belief that I hadn't just seen a trick of the light or a weird shadow. I had witnessed a Sasquatch. I've never seen it again. Not clearly. Just glimpses of dark movement in the deep woods where maybe it was just a shadow and the sounds that don't belong. But that one morning in March of 1982 is enough. The image of it standing there, the crunch of its steps in the frost, the metallic squeal of that fence wire, it's all right here, like a film reel playing in my head. I go about my life. I'm a grandfather now. But sometimes when I'm out in the woods and the wind is just right, or the silence gets too deep, I remember, and the fear, that old cold knot, tightens in my gut all over again. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it was there. And I don't know if it's still there. I just know what I saw. And I know that for one morning, the world wasn't the simple, safe place I thought it was. It was something else entirely. Story 12. It was August of 1965, and I was 16 years old. That summer, our family was on vacation at a rented cottage on Pelican Lake in Wisconsin. It was one of those bright, perfect summer days where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, and the air smells like warm water and pine trees. My little brother William was 9, and I was in charge of him for the afternoon. Our parents were back at the cottage, probably happy for a few hours of quiet. We were driving around in my dad's red Pontiac convertible. The top was down, and the wind was whipping through our hair. I had just gotten my driver's license a few months before, and driving that car, feeling the sun on my skin and the big V8 engine rumbling under my feet, made me feel so grown up. William was bouncing in the passenger seat, his arm hanging out the window, trying to catch the air in his hand. We were just exploring, no real destination. We'd turned off Highway 45 onto this smaller road called County Q. It was a narrow, paved road that wound its way through thick, mature forest, following the curve of the north shore of the lake. You'd get glimpses of the water through the trees, sparkling like a million diamonds under the sun. The radio was playing some pop song, and everything felt easy and right with the world. The road started to twist a bit more with sharper curves. I remember slowing down, taking it careful, because my dad would have killed me if I put a scratch on his car. We came around one bend, and the road did this sort of sharp jog to the left before straightening out again. The trees were dense on both sides, a solid wall of green so dark it was almost black in the shadows. And that's when we saw it. It was just there, in the middle of the road, right in the apex of that jog. It was walking, slow and deliberate, from the left side of the road to the right. My brain didn't process it at first. It was like my eyes saw it, but my mind couldn't make sense of the shape. It was so far outside of anything I expected to see. It was tall, so unbelievably tall. I'm 6 feet tall myself, and this thing made me feel like a little kid. It had to be at least 9 feet. It wasn't bulky like a bear or a gorilla. It was slim, built like one of those professional basketball players, all long, lean limbs, but it was covered, head to toe, in this thick, shaggy hair. It wasn't brown or grizzly-colored, it was black, a deep, solid, glossy black, like a crow's feather, and the sun hit it and made it look almost wet. It was walking on 2 legs just like a person. Its arms swung naturally at its sides. Its gait was smooth, effortless, like it owned the ground it was walking on. It wasn't in a hurry, it was just crossing the road. I must have slammed on the brakes because the Pontiac lurched and the tires squealed a little on the hot pavement. The car shuddered to a stop, and we were maybe 50, 60 feet away from it. The radio was still playing some stupid happy song, a complete mismatch to the ice water that was suddenly flooding my veins. The creature heard us. It stopped right in the center of the road, and then it turned its head. It turned its head and looked right at us. That was the worst part, the looking. Its face wasn't really a face like yours or mine. There wasn't a flat nose or big lips. The hair covered everything, but you could see the structure underneath. A heavy brow ridge, and beneath that, 2 eyes. They were these deep-set, intelligent eyes. I can't tell you what color they were. Dark, I think, but they weren't animal eyes. They weren't the blank, stupid eyes of a deer. There was a mind behind them, a presence. It locked eyes with me, directly with me. It held its gaze for what felt like an entire minute, but it was probably only a few seconds. In that look, there was no anger, no fear, no surprise. It was just a look, a calm, assessing, knowing look. It saw me. It saw the car. It saw my little brother frozen beside me. It saw everything, and it understood what it was seeing. A terror like I have never felt before or since washed over me. It wasn't a fear of being attacked. It was a deeper, more fundamental fear. The fear that comes from realizing that the world is not what you thought it was, that the map you have of reality is missing entire continents. This thing was not supposed to exist, and yet it was standing there, in the bright sunshine of a Tuesday afternoon, looking at me with a quiet, undeniable reality that shattered my whole understanding of the world. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. My hands were glued to the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I could only stare back into those eyes. Next to me, William made a tiny choked sound, like a whimper that got stuck in his throat. Then, as calmly as it had looked at us, the creature turned its head away. It looked back towards the woods on the right side of the road, and it started walking again. It didn't run, it didn't hurry, it just took these long, ground-eating strides. Its legs were so long that it crossed the rest of the pavement in just a few steps. It reached the edge of the road, where the asphalt crumbled into dirt and weeds, and without breaking stride, it stepped into the forest. And I don't mean it pushed through thick brush. The woods there were mature, with tall trees and not a lot of low bushes. It just melted into the shadows. It moved between the big tree trunks like it was part of the forest itself. 1 second it was there, its dark form stark against the green, and the next second it was gone. Completely. There was no sound, no cracking branches, no rustling leaves, nothing. The forest just swallowed it up like it had never been there at all. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. The only sound was the idling rumble of the Pontiac's engine and that damn cheerful song still blaring from the radio. My body unlocked in a frantic rush of adrenaline. I stomped on the gas pedal. The engine roared and the car shot forward. I didn't care about the curves anymore. I gripped the wheel, my eyes glued to the road, terrified that it would step back out in front of us. I sped through that jog in the road and kept going, the wind screaming past our ears. William was crying now, quiet, scared sobs. He had pulled his arm inside the car and was huddled down in his seat. We came out on the other side of the wooded stretch, and the road straightened out. I could see more of the lake through the trees again. I slowed down, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest. I pulled the car over onto the narrow gravel shoulder and threw it into park. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the gear shift lever into position. I just sat there for a minute, trying to catch my breath. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in, and it felt like a physical weight on my chest. "Stay here," I said to William. My voice came out as a dry croak. "Do not get out of this car. Lock the doors." He just nodded, his eyes wide and full of tears, his face pale. I got out of the car. My legs felt like jelly. I walked back along the edge of the road, towards the spot where it had disappeared. The sun was still blazing, the day was still beautiful, but it felt wrong now. It felt like a painted backdrop, and something had torn a hole in it. I stood at the exact place where it had entered the woods. I peered into the trees. The shadows were deep and cool. The air was still. I listened, straining my ears for any sound. A footstep, a snapped twig, anything. There was nothing. Absolute total silence, not even bird song. It was as if every living thing in that part of the forest was holding its breath. I looked at the ground. The dirt at the edge of the road was soft, and there, plain as day, was a single footprint. It was huge, longer than my forearm. It was a human-shaped foot, but broader, with the toes splayed out. The impression was deep. This thing was heavy. The detail I remember most, the one that really got to me, was that I could see the texture of the skin on the sole, pressed into the dirt. It wasn't smooth. It was patterned, like a fingerprint. I didn't go any further. A cold dread was washing over me, the feeling of being watched. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck was standing straight up. The woods, which had seemed so friendly and familiar just half an hour ago, now felt like a hostile, alien place. Every shadow between the trees seemed to hide a shape. Every rustle of a leaf in the light breeze sounded like a footstep. I turned around and almost ran back to the car. I yanked the door open, slid behind the wheel, and locked my door. William was still huddled in his seat, watching me. "Did you see it?" he whispered. I just shook my head. I couldn't form words. I started the car and pulled back onto the road, driving back the way we came, back towards the cottage. I drove the speed limit this time, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that tall, dark figure loping after us down the center of the road. We didn't talk the whole way back. What was there to say? We had both seen it. There was no denying it. When we pulled into the gravel driveway of the cottage, our mom came out onto the porch, smiling. "Did you guys have a nice drive?" William and I just looked at each other. We got out of the car and I remember the feeling of the sun on my skin again, but it didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like a spotlight. We went inside and we never told our parents. Not that day, not ever. What would we have said? "Hey, Mom, Dad, we saw a 9-foot-tall hairy man in the woods today." They would have thought we were crazy or that we'd been in the sun too long. The rest of the vacation was different. The lake didn't seem as fun. The woods around the cottage, which we used to play in, now felt like they had eyes. I didn't sleep well for weeks after we got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. That tall, slim, black figure. The slow, deliberate walk. And most of all, those eyes. That direct, intelligent, utterly calm stare. It's been a lifetime since that day. William is a grown man with kids of his own now. We've talked about it a few times over the years. When it's just us, he remembers it exactly the same way I do. The details never change. The tall basketball player build, the jet black hair, the way it looked at us, the complete and total silence when it vanished. I've read all the books, seen all the TV shows. People talk about big, bulky creatures, smelly creatures, creatures that scream and throw rocks. That's not what we saw. We saw something elegant and powerful and, in its own way, peaceful. It didn't threaten us, it just was. But that doesn't make it any less terrifying, because what I took away from that day, what has stayed with me for all these decades, is the absolute certainty that we are not alone in these woods. There are things living in the deep, old forests that we don't understand, that we can't explain. And sometimes on a bright summer day, you might just turn a corner and come face to face with one of them, and it will see you. Story 13. It was one of those perfect summer days, the kind you see on postcards. The 21st of August 2005, a Sunday. My husband, our son, who was 9 at the time, and I had decided to hike into Roosevelt Lake up in Mono County. We were living down in Bishop then, and these weekend trips into the high country were our thing, our escape. This one was supposed to be just like all the others. The drive up was all dust and winding roads, the Jeep kicking up a tan plume behind us. The air was hot and dry, but you could feel the promise of cooler temperatures as we climbed. By the time we parked at the trailhead, it was probably 85 degrees, but in the shade of the pines, it felt okay. The air smelled like sun-baked granite and warm pine needles. Our son, he was buzzing with energy, hopping from one rock to another, his little fishing rod clutched in his hand like a spear. He'd been talking about catching the big one for a week straight. The hike-in is a bit of a grind, not gonna lie. It's a steady climb, and the thin air at that altitude makes you feel it in your lungs. But the views... Man, the views are worth it. When you break through the trees and see Roosevelt Lake for the first time, it just lays there. This perfect sheet of dark blue glass, cradled by these massive, stark grey cliffs. It's silent up there, a deep, heavy quiet that feels ancient. We found our usual spot on a flat granite slab that sloped right into the water. The fishing was slow. I remember the three of us just sitting there for what felt like hours. The sun warm on our skin, the only sounds being the gentle plink of our lines in the water and the occasional whisper of wind through the lodgepole pines. It was peaceful, the kind of peaceful that sinks into your bones and makes you forget about bills and work and all the other noise down below. We didn't catch a thing, not even a bite. After a few hours, my husband looked at his watch and said we should probably start heading back if we wanted to be down before dark. We packed up our gear, a little disappointed about the fish, but still feeling that good, worn-out tiredness you get from a day in the mountains. The trail back follows the same route, but going downhill always feels different. You're more relaxed. Your mind starts to wander. We were maybe 20-25 minutes into the hike back, single file on the narrow path with my husband in the lead, me in the middle, and our son bringing up the rear. The forest was thick here, a mix of tall pines and dense, shadowy undergrowth. That's when we heard it. It wasn't an animal's sound. I know what a coyote yelp sounds like, what a bear grunt sounds like. This was different. It came from ahead of us, a sharp, loud shout. It was a human sound, or at least it started that way. It was like a man's voice, a single loud call, maybe a "hey," but stretched and distorted, and the instant it faded, something else echoed it back from the ridge to our left. The echo, that was the first thing that made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't a real echo, it was wrong. It was lower, guttural, like a wet, heavy cough shaping the same sound. It didn't bounce naturally. It felt like a mockery, a response. It was unnatural in a way that's hard to put into words. It wasn't just sound bouncing off rock. It felt intelligent. We all stopped dead in our tracks. My husband turned around, his eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Our son had moved up right beside me, his small hand grabbing the strap of my day pack. "Mom," he said, his voice small. "Probably just some other hikers," my husband said, but his voice was tight. He didn't believe it. We stood there for a full minute, not moving, just listening. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no wind. It was that heavy, waiting silence that feels louder than any noise. It presses in on your eardrums. "Let's just keep moving," I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. We started walking again, but faster now. The easy, relaxed feeling was gone, replaced by a low thrum of anxiety. We weren't talking anymore. We were just listening, our eyes scanning the trees. The trail started to open up a bit, leading towards the south end of these wide, beautiful meadows they have up there. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long, deep shadows from the surrounding trees. The meadow was golden green, dotted with wildflowers, and normally it would have been a breathtaking sight. Right then, it just felt exposed. That's when I saw it. My husband saw it a split second before I did. He froze, his arms shooting out to stop me. I followed his gaze and my brain just stuttered. On the far side of the meadow, maybe 200 yards away, moving from one patch of trees to another, was a figure. It was solid black. Not dark brown or grey, but a pure, deep, absorbent black, like a hole cut out of the world. It was tall, really tall. I'm not good at estimating height from a distance, but it was taller than any man I've ever seen, and it was moving, but it wasn't running. That's what my mind kept screaming at me. It wasn't running, it was gliding. It moved across the meadow with an impossible fluid speed, covering ground in these long, smooth strides. But I swear to God, I saw no leg movement, no pumping arms. Its legs were just there underneath it, but they didn't seem to bend. The whole thing was just this black shape slicing horizontally across the golden grass. It was like watching a person-shaped object being pulled on a wire, fast and utterly silent. The second thing that registered through the sheer wrongness of its movement was what it was wearing. It was dressed head to toe in black, not hiking gear. It looked like a single, tight-fitting black suit, a bodysuit, in 85-degree weather, in the middle of the Sierra Nevada. Who does that? The absurdity of that detail cut through the fear for a nanosecond. It was so out of place, so bizarre. We were just standing there, paralyzed. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like flutter. My mouth had gone completely dry, and then my son, who was still holding onto my packstrap, let out a short, sharp yell. It wasn't a scream of terror, more a yelp of pure, startled surprise. Whoa! The moment the sound left his lips, the thing stopped. It didn't slow down. It didn't turn. It just stopped its forward glide instantaneously, as if it had hit an invisible wall, and then it pivoted. This was the worst part, the single most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed in my life. It didn't turn its head to look over its shoulder. It didn't shift its feet. Its entire upper body, from the waist up, rotated towards us in one single, fluid, mechanical motion. There was no hesitation, no preparation. It was like a statue on a swivel. The movement was utterly inhuman. A person can't do that. A person has to move their hips, their shoulders, their neck. This thing just rotated its torso a full 90 degrees to face us, while its legs and lower body remained pointed in the direction it had been traveling. We were staring right at it, and it was staring right at us. I couldn't see any features on its face. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a smooth, black, featureless oval where a head should be. There was no expression, no curiosity, no anger. There was just presence. An intense, focused awareness directed at us from across that meadow. The silence in that moment was absolute. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. I was aware of the cold sweat trickling down my back, of the way my husband's hand was trembling where it still gripped my arm. I was aware of my son's small, warm body pressed against my leg. It held that position for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. Then, with that same unnatural fluidity, its upper body swiveled back to face forward, and it resumed its gliding motion, disappearing into the tall grass and shadows at the edge of the trees on the other side of the meadow. As soon as it was gone, the spell broke. "We have to get closer," my husband said. His voice a ragged whisper. He sounded insane. I knew it was insane, but I also felt this insane, compulsive need to know, to prove to myself that we hadn't just all shared the same hallucination. "Are you crazy?" I hissed back. "We have to see. We have to know what that was." He started moving, not running, but walking with a determined, fast stride, cutting diagonally across the meadow towards where it had vanished. I grabbed our son's hand and followed, my legs feeling like rubber. Every part of my body was screaming at me to run in the opposite direction, to get as far away as possible. But this morbid, dreadful curiosity pulled me forward. The grass in the meadow was tall, up to our thighs in some places. We were breathing hard, not from exertion, but from pure adrenaline. I could smell the sweet, dusty scent of the grass and my own fear sweat. We reached the spot, or what we thought was the spot. It was hard to be sure. The tree line was a mess of shadows and thick manzanita bushes. There was nothing there, no broken branches, no footprints in the soft, damp earth near the trees, no sound. We stood there, the three of us, scanning the woods, peering into the deepening shadows. Nothing. It had just vanished into thin air. The tall grass where it had been standing wasn't even flattened. That's when the feeling hit me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a deep, chilling, profound sense of wrongness. It was the feeling that we had witnessed something that wasn't meant for us to see, something that didn't belong in our world, with our rules of physics and biology. The gliding, the pivoting torso, the featureless face, the silent, effortless disappearance. It was all wrong. We didn't speak on the rest of the hike back. We just walked fast, constantly looking over our shoulders. The forest, which had always felt like a friendly, familiar place, now felt like it was watching us. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump. We practically ran the last half mile to the jeep. We threw our gear in the back, got in, and my husband locked the doors. He just sat there for a minute, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was staring straight ahead, not saying anything. I looked in the rearview mirror at our son. He was pale, just staring out his window, his fishing rod forgotten on the seat beside him. We drove down the mountain in silence. The sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, but the beauty of it was lost on us. We were wrapped in this cold, shared dread. We never reported it. Who would we tell? The police. They'd think we were crazy. A park ranger. What would we say? We saw a tall black gliding thing that pivoted at the waist. It sounds insane even now, typing it out. We've never talked about it much since. It's like this unspoken thing between us. My husband will sometimes get a distant look in his eyes, and I know he's thinking about it. My son, he's a grown man now, and he's never brought it up. I don't know if he even remembers it clearly, or if his child's mind filed it away as a weird dream. But I remember. I remember the heat of the sun, the smell of the pine, the perfect silence of the lake. And I remember the absolute soul-deep terror of watching that black figure glide across the meadow, and the way its whole upper body turned to face us in a way that nothing living should ever be able to move. I saw it, we all saw it, and I have no explanation for what it was. None at all. It was just there, and then it was gone. And it left this cold, empty space in my understanding of the world that's never gone away. Story 14. This was back in 2008, late October. I remember because the leaves were all turned, and it was that time of year where it gets dark real early. I was living in Rogersville, Tennessee, and I'd been visiting a friend over in Surgensville. I was driving myself home, north on Highway 70. It's a pretty normal road, 2 lanes, winding through the hills. You know the type. Lots of trees crowding right up to the edges. Dark as hell at night once you get away from the few streetlights in the little towns. It was a Tuesday, I think, a work night. So it was late, but not crazy late. Probably around 9:30. I was going about 45 miles an hour, just cruising, listening to some classic rock station that was fading in and out. My high beams were on because, like I said, it was pitch black out there. No moon that I remember. Just my headlights, cutting a tunnel through the dark. I was just driving, not thinking about much. My mind was on work the next day. What I was gonna make for lunch. Just normal, boring stuff. I came around this gentle left-hand curve. The road straightened out for a bit, and that's when I saw it. It came out of the woods on my right. It didn't step out. It didn't amble. It erupted from the tree line. My brain didn't even have time to process it as an animal at first. It was just a sudden, massive, dark shape, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen on two legs. I slammed my foot down on the brake pedal so hard I felt it in my spine. The tires screamed and the whole car shuddered, the anti-lock brakes juddering under me. I was thrown forward against my seatbelt, my heart just seizing up in my chest. I skidded to a stop, the nose of my car probably just a few yards from where it had been, and in that frozen moment, with my high beams still blazing, I saw it perfectly. It was tall, so damn tall. Well over 6 feet. It was lean, but not skinny. It was all corded muscle, like a long-distance runner, but covered in this long, shaggy black hair. The hair wasn't stiff, it flowed. As it ran, the hair on its arms and legs and back streamed behind it in the wind it was creating. It was running on two legs, full tilt, across the road from my right to my left. Its legs were long, and its stride was inhuman. It covered the entire two-lane road in maybe 2 or 3 strides. It wasn't a lope, it was a sprint. A powerful, ground-eating sprint that was utterly silent. I didn't hear any footfalls, any panting, nothing, just the sound of my own car skidding and my own blood pounding in my ears. The thing is, I wasn't the only one who saw it. There was a truck coming the other way. He must have seen it a split second after I did, because he slammed on his brakes too. His truck, an older Ford F-150, I think, fishtailed a little before he got it stopped. And now we were just 2 vehicles, stopped dead in the middle of Highway 70, maybe 50 feet apart, both with our high beams on, and both of us had just watched this thing cross the road between us. For a second, there was just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like a weight on your ears. My engine was still running. My radio was still playing some stupid commercial. I just sat there, my hands glued to the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my knuckles white. I couldn't move. I was just staring at the spot where it had vanished into the woods on the left side of the road. Then I saw the driver's side door of the truck open. A man got out. He was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, wearing a baseball cap. He didn't run over or anything. He just stood there next to his truck, and he was staring at the same spot I was. Then he turned and looked at me. I saw him gesture, a kind of, "What the hell?" motion with his hands. That broke my paralysis. My window was already down a crack for the fresh air. I fumbled for the button and rolled it all the way down. The cool night air hit my face. "You see that?" the man yelled across the road. His voice was shaky, but it carried in the quiet. "Yeah," I yelled back. My own voice was thin, reedy. "Yeah, I saw it." "What was that?" he asked, and he sounded just as bewildered and scared as I felt. I just shook my head. I had no words. "A bear." "No, bears don't run like that on 2 legs. They just don't." "A person in a costume? No way." The speed, the sheer size, the way it moved, it was too fluid, too powerful. It was real. It was a living thing. Then the passenger door of his truck opened, and a woman got out. I think it was his wife. Then the back door opened, and a younger person, maybe a teenager, got out too. They all clustered around the front of the truck, and they were all looking at me and then at the woods. "Did you all see it?" I called over. The woman nodded vigorously, her hand over her mouth. The kid just stared, wide-eyed. We all just stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. No other cars came. It was just us, in this little bubble of terror on a dark Tennessee highway. The man and I, we tried to do something useful. We both got back in our vehicles and slowly pulled them forward, angling them so our headlights were shining up the embankment where the thing had disappeared. The light from 4 high beams is intense. It lit up the base of the trees, the ditch, the underbrush. It should have illuminated anything bigger than a rabbit, but there was nothing, no movement, no sign of it. The woods were just woods, dark, thick, and silent. It had vanished completely. It had moved with such speed that it should have been crashing through the brush for 100 yards, but there was no sound, no cracking twigs, no rustling leaves, nothing. It was just gone. The man rolled his window down again. "There's nothing," he said, and he sounded defeated. "I know," I said. "I don't see anything either." We looked at each other for another long moment. There was nothing else to do. We couldn't call the police and say what? We saw a big, hairy thing run across the road. They'd think we were drunk or crazy. We were just two strangers connected by this impossible shared horror. He gave me a sort of helpless wave. I waved back. Then he put his truck in gear, and so did I. We drove off slowly in opposite directions. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My whole body was trembling. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see those long legs keeping pace with my car. But there was only darkness. I got home, locked the door behind me, and just sat on my couch in the dark for an hour. I couldn't even think straight. My mind kept replaying those 2 or 3 seconds over and over, the way the hair flowed, the impossible length of its stride, the sheer raw power in its movement. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I went to work at the auto parts store in Rogersville. I was a wreck, jumpy, tired, distracted. My co-worker Dave noticed. He asked me if I was feeling okay. I just mumbled something about not sleeping well. Later that morning, Dave was on the phone with his wife. I was stocking shelves nearby, not really listening, until I heard him say, "Wait, what? Last night on 70? My head snapped up. He was listening, his eyes getting wider. He said, "A big, black, hairy thing running across the road, and he and some other guy both saw it?" I just froze, a box of spark plugs in my hand. Dave hung up the phone and turned to me. "You are not going to believe this," he said. "My father-in-law, Frank, he was driving home from my place last night on 70. He says he and some other car both had to slam on their brakes because this creature ran across the road in front of them. He said it was huge, covered in black hair, and ran on 2 legs faster than anything he'd ever seen." I felt the blood drain from my face. I must have gone pale because Dave looked at me and said, "Whoa, you okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed to find my voice. What time was this?" "He said around 9:30, Dave said. Said the other driver was in a little silver Honda. Looked just as shocked as he was. I drive a silver Honda Civic, 2006 model." I just stared at Dave. My mouth was dry. "That was me," I whispered. Dave's joking demeanor vanished. "What?" "That was me. Last night, on 70. I was the other driver." We stood there in silence for a minute, surrounded by shelves of oil filters and brake pads. The mundane reality of the store clashed violently with the memory from the night before. Dave's father-in-law, a man I'd never met before. We had both seen the exact same thing from opposite sides of the road. We had confirmed it with each other in that moment of shared panic. And now, through a bizarre coincidence, that confirmation had come around again in the harsh light of day. Dave told me later that his father-in-law had described me perfectly. My car, my shocked expression, everything. He said Frank was a no-nonsense guy, a retired mechanic, not the type to make stuff up or get spooked easily. He was genuinely shaken up. That's when the local rumors started clicking into place. I'd heard whispers before, you know, stories from hunters about things they'd seen deep in the Cherokee National Forest, reports of strange, loud screams that didn't sound like any animal they knew, talk of Bigfoot, I'd always dismissed it as folklore, campfire stories for bored locals. I don't dismiss it anymore. I didn't see a monster from a movie. I didn't see a ghost. I saw a living, breathing animal, but it was an animal that shouldn't exist. The terror of that moment wasn't just the shock of seeing it, it was the realization in that split second that the world is not the safe, known, mapped-out place I thought it was. There are still blank spots on the map, even on a well-traveled highway in Tennessee. There are things that live in those blank spots, things that can cross from their world into ours in the space of a heartbeat and leave you sitting in your car, your heart trying to beat its way out of your chest, forever changed. The image of it, illuminated in my high beams, is burned into my brain. The way it moved, the silence, the feeling of its raw, untamed power, I'll never forget it. And sometimes, when I'm driving on a dark road at night, I'll catch a movement in the periphery of my headlights, and my foot will hover over the brake. And for a second, the terror is right there again, as fresh as it was that night. I saw something. We all saw it, and I have no idea what it was. Story 15. It was the summer of 1974, and I was just a kid, really. Me and my friend, we were both 16 that year, and we lived for being out on the water. We were camping on this little island out in the Little Portage River Marsh, a spot we knew pretty well. We weren't there for fun. Not exactly. We'd set a bunch of turtle hooks the day before, and we were there to check them. It was just a thing we did. The island wasn't much more than a bump of land, covered in reeds and a few scrubby trees. You could walk across it in about a minute. We had our little canvas tent pitched right in the middle, a two-man job that smelled like mildew and old campfires. We'd gotten there in the afternoon, puttered around in the John boat, checked a few lines, didn't get much, and then just kind of lazed around until it got dark. We had a cheap transistor radio with us, one of those little rectangular things with a telescoping antenna. We had it tuned to some station out of Sandusky playing rock music, just something to fill the quiet of the marsh. The moon was out that night. It was a clear night, not a cloud in the sky, and the moon was so bright it cast shadows. It was a weird silvery light that made everything look both sharp and kind of dreamlike. The water was like black glass, just perfectly still, and you could see the reflection of the moon rippling a little if a bug landed on the surface. It was dead quiet too, except for the peepers and the occasional splash of a fish. The radio was just background noise. It must have been around 10:30 at night. We were just sitting on a log we'd dragged over by the tent, not talking much, just listening to the radio and staring out at the water. The marsh at night feels huge, like it goes on forever. You feel very, very small. Then we heard the first splash. It wasn't a fish. A fish makes a smaller, quicker sound. This was a heavy, solid ker-plunk, like someone had thrown a big rock into the water. It came from out in the channel, maybe 100 yards away. We both stopped talking and looked at each other. My friend had his eyebrows raised. "Beaver," he whispered. I just shrugged. We listened. A few seconds later, another one. Ker-plunk. Same kind of sound, same general area, but it sounded like it was a little closer. The hair on my arms started to stand up. It was a feeling, you know? Just a gut feeling that something wasn't right. The normal night sounds, the peepers, they all went quiet for a second, like the whole marsh was listening too. Then the third splash. Ker-plunk. Even closer this time. It was a pattern. 1, 2, 3. Deliberate. Something was moving through the water, and it was big, and it was coming toward our island. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. I remember the feeling of the rough bark of the log under my hands, the cool night air suddenly feeling colder on my skin. "Turn off the radio," I said, and my voice was quieter than I meant it to be. My friend reached over and clicked the little plastic dial. The tinny music cut off, and the silence that rushed in was heavy, thick. It was a pressure on my ears. We were both staring out into the darkness, toward where the sounds had come from. The moon was so bright on the water, but beyond its glow, everything was just deep, deep black. We saw the ripples first, out in the middle of the channel, right where the last splash had been. A set of expanding rings on the water's surface, catching the moonlight. They were big ripples, the kind made by something with a lot of mass. We were frozen, just watching. My breathing felt too loud, and then it stepped out. It came up from the deeper water into a shallower area, a spot we knew was only about 2.5, maybe 4 feet deep, but with a bottom of thick, sucking muck. We'd gotten our boat stuck there before. You'd sink in past your knees if you tried to walk in it. This thing didn't sink. It just rose up out of the black water, waist deep, and stood there. It was about 75 yards away, right in a patch of moonlight so we could see it clearly. I mean, the details are burned into my brain. It was tall, so damn tall. Its head and shoulders were above the water, and the water was at its waist, so you do the math. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear. It was long and shaggy, and it was dark, a wet, blackish-brown color from being in the water. The moonlight glinted off its wet fur. It was broad, too, massive through the chest and shoulders. It just stood there, facing us. It didn't move. It was like a statue. The water was dripping off of it, and I could hear the little plink-plink sounds as the drops hit the surface of the river. The ease with which it was standing in that muck was the first thing that really got to me. It should have been struggling. It should have been sinking. It was just standing solid, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The terror moment, the one that still wakes me up sometimes, was when it stopped and seemed to look directly at us. We were hidden, I thought. We were in the shadows of the trees on the island, but it knew we were there. Its head was turned toward us. I couldn't see its eyes, not from that distance and in that light, but I could feel them. I could feel this awareness, this intelligence. It wasn't just some dumb animal that had wandered by. It was looking at us, studying us. It knew we were two kids sitting on a log, scared out of our minds. My whole body went cold. It was a cold that started in my guts and spread out to my fingers and toes. My mouth was so dry I couldn't have spoken if I tried. I just sat there, gripping that log, my knuckles white. I could feel my friend trembling next to me. I could hear his quick, shallow breaths. We were both paralyzed. It stood there for 45 seconds. I know because I counted. In my head, just ticking off the seconds, one after another, each one feeling like a minute. The world had shrunk down to just me, my friend, and this thing standing in the water looking at us. Nothing else existed. There was no sound, no wind, no marsh, just this silent staring contest with a monster. Then it turned its head. It wasn't a quick movement. It was slow, deliberate. It looked away from us, down the channel, like it had heard something we couldn't. And then it started to walk. It walked away from us, moving through that waist-deep water and the thick bottom muck like it was nothing, like it was walking on a paved road. There was no struggle, no splashing, just this powerful, steady, unhurried movement. Its shoulders rolled with each step. It was so confident, so completely in its element. It walked until it disappeared into the darker shadows on the far side of the channel. And then it was just gone. The ripples it left behind slowly faded away. For another few seconds, we just sat there. The spell was broken. The night sounds started to come back, the peepers first, tentatively. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My body was shaking, a full-on, uncontrollable tremble. Next to me, my friend spoke. His voice was thin and shaky, barely more than a whisper. It was probably just a trapper, a guy in waders. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. I knew otherwise. I had looked at that thing and I had known. No trapper was that big. No man could move through that muck with such ease. No man had shoulders that wide or was covered in hair like that. It wasn't a man. He didn't believe his own words. I could see it in his face, pale in the moonlight. He stood up, his movements jerky. "We're leaving now." He didn't wait for me to agree. He started yanking the tent pegs out of the ground, not even bothering to fold the tent properly. He just wadded it up, poles and all, and threw it into the bottom of our John boat. He was frantic, his hands fumbling with the ropes. I just sat on the log watching him, my mind still back there, watching that thing walk away. I was in awe, a terrified, bone-deep awe. I had seen something that wasn't supposed to be real. We didn't even think about the turtle hooks. We had a dozen lines out there, with good hooks and weights. We just left them. We got in the boat. My friend yanked the pull cord on the little outboard motor, and it sputtered to life on the first try, the sound incredibly loud and out of place. He didn't even point the boat toward home at first. He just aimed it away from that spot, away from where we'd seen it, and opened the throttle. We bounced over our own wake, the cold spray hitting my face, and I didn't look back. I couldn't. We didn't talk the whole way back to the landing. The ride felt like it took forever and no time at all. When we got to the truck, we threw the boat on the trailer, tied it down with hands that were still shaking, and drove away. We didn't say a word about it for years. It was just this thing that had happened, this secret terror we shared but never spoke of. But that wasn't the end of it for me. That was just the beginning of knowing. The second time was in the summer of 1977. I was home from college, staying with my dad. We were out on the back porch of his house, which overlooks a canal that feeds into the same marsh system. It was a warm, still night, maybe 11 o'clock. We were just sitting there drinking iced tea, talking about nothing important, and then we heard it. It came from across the canal, from deep in the marsh. A sound I'd never heard before and have never heard since. It wasn't an owl. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a fox. It was like a scream, a howl, and a yodel all mixed together into one noise. It was loud, and it was intelligent. It had a pattern to it, a weird, warbling rise and fall that didn't sound like any animal I knew. It was a voice. The sound went right through me. My hair literally stood up on my arms and the back of my neck. I felt that same cold dread from 3 years before wash over me. I looked at my dad. He was a tough guy, a Korean war vet. Not much scared him, but his face had gone white. He was staring out into the darkness, his knuckles tight around his glass of tea. The sound came again, closer this time, that same unearthly scream, howl, yodel. It echoed across the water, and it felt like it was right on the other side of the canal. Without a word, my dad stood up, walked into the house, and I heard him lock the back door. Then he went around and locked the front door. Then he checked the windows. He never locked the doors, not ever. We lived in a safe area. And he was from a generation that didn't think about that stuff. But that night, he locked every door in the house before we went to bed. He was visibly shaken. He didn't say what he thought it was. He didn't have to. I knew in my soul it was connected to what I saw on that island. The third time was in the fall of 1983. I was squirrel hunting with my cousin near Clyde, Ohio, which isn't that far from Port Clinton, maybe 20 miles as the crow flies. We were in his woodlot, trying to get an early start. It was pitch black, about 4:30 in the morning. We were standing next to a big oak tree, waiting for the sun to come up enough to see, not talking, just listening to the woods wake up. And then I heard it again, the same sound. That exact same combination of a scream, a howl, and a yodel. It was farther away this time, maybe a half-mile off through the trees, but it was unmistakable. It was the same voice. My cousin heard it too. He turned to me, his eyes wide in the gloom. "What in the hell was that?" he whispered. I just shook my head. I couldn't speak. The fear was back, that same primitive gut-level terror. It was like being visited by a ghost from that moonlit night on the river. It confirmed everything for me. It wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't my imagination. That thing, or something like it, was out there. It lived in these woods and marshes, and it could make its presence known. We didn't get any squirrels that day. I was too jumpy, too busy scanning the tree line, not for squirrels, but for a tall, dark shape. We left before noon, so that's it. That's my account. I saw it. I heard it years later, and I heard it again years after that. I'm a grown man now, with a family and a job, and I live in the real world. But I know what I saw standing in the little Portage River. I know what I heard across that canal and in those woods. It was real. It was solid. And the memory of it, the feeling of it looking right at me, is something I've never, ever been able to shake. I can close my eyes and be right back on that island, 16 years old, watching something step out of the water that had no business being there. And I feel that same cold fear. I don't know what it was. I just know what it wasn't. And I know that for 45 seconds, it knew I was there. Story 16. I'd been feeling kinda lazy all day, just taking it easy after a long week. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the TV and the occasional snore from the dogs. I had the back door open because it wasn't too hot, just a screen door between me and the backyard. My patio's out there, nothing fancy, just a concrete slab with some old lawn chairs, and beyond that a wooden fence that separates the yard from the woods. Those woods are dense, full of pines and oaks, and they've always given me this uneasy feeling, especially after what happened back in 1999, but I'll get to that in a bit. So there I was, half dozing on the couch, when my Yorkie suddenly perked up. He's usually pretty chill, but his ears went straight up, and he let out this low growl that I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't his normal "I see a squirrel" bark. It was deeper, more aggressive, like he was warning something off. I sat up a little, thinking maybe it was just a deer or a raccoon wandering too close. We get those all the time out here. But then he started barking like crazy, his whole body tense, and he jumped off the couch and ran toward the back door. My other dog, the bigger one, she just lifted her head and whined, like she was scared, which is weird because she's usually the brave one. I got up slowly, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I walked over to the door, peering out through the screen. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the patio, the fence, and the trees beyond. The light was kinda dim because of the clouds, so shadows were playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, near the edge of the patio, something moved. It was fast. So fast that I almost missed it. My Yorkie was still barking his head off, and I shushed him, trying to hear better. That's when I got a clear look. It was tall, really tall, like 10 feet or more, and covered in dark matted hair. It wasn't walking, it was moving in this quick, fluid motion, almost gliding, but with a power that made the air feel thick. I only saw it for a second, maybe two, but it was enough to freeze me in place. The size of it, it was massive, broader than any man I've ever seen, and the way it moved wasn't human. It didn't have that lumbering gait you see in movies. It was more like a burst of energy, like it was darting from one spot to another. I could see the muscles rippling under that dark fur, and for a split second I thought I smelled something, like wet earth and something else, something rotten. But it might have been my imagination because I was so scared. My brain took a second to catch up. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. My hands were trembling, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. The Yorkie was still going nuts, barking and snarling, and I could see the hair on his back standing straight up. My other dog had retreated under the couch, whining softly. I kept staring out there, but whatever it was gone, vanished, just like that. One moment it was there near the patio, and the next, nothing. The woods were silent, like everything had stopped to watch. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run outside and check, but another part was screaming at me to stay put. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my legs felt like jelly. I forced myself to take a step back from the door, my eyes still glued to the spot where I'd seen it. The patio was empty now, but the image was burned into my mind, that dark, hairy figure moving with a speed that shouldn't be possible for something that big. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears around here and they don't move like that. This was different. This was something else. After a minute or so, the Yorkie calmed down a little, but he was still on edge, pacing back and forth in front of the door. I knew I had to do something, so I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I thought about calling someone, but who would I call? The police? And say what? That I saw a big hairy thing in my backyard? They'd think I was crazy. So I decided to go out and check the fence line myself. I put on my shoes, my movements slow and deliberate, like I was afraid to make any noise. I grabbed a flashlight, even though it wasn't dark yet, but the clouds made it feel like it could get dark any minute. I stepped outside and the air felt colder than before, like the temperature had dropped suddenly. The backyard was quiet, too quiet. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, just this eerie silence. I walked slowly toward the patio, my eyes scanning the ground. The grass was a bit damp from the humidity, and I could see my own footprints leading back to the door. But then I noticed something else. A patch of grass near the edge of the patio was flattened, like something heavy had been standing there. And there were marks, not quite footprints, but indents in the soil, bigger than any animal track I've seen. They were deep, like whatever made them had a lot of weight behind it. I followed the fence line, my heart still racing. The fence is about 6 feet high, made of wood, and it's seen better days. In one spot, near the corner where the woods start, the top board was splintered, like something had hit it or climbed over it. I reached out and touched it, and the wood felt rough with bits of bark stuck to it. That's when I saw it, a few strands of dark hair caught on a nail. It was coarse, almost like horsehair, but thicker and darker. I picked it up, and it felt weird in my fingers, oily and strong. I dropped it quickly like it was contaminated and wiped my hand on my pants. Standing there, looking into the woods, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. The trees were so close together that it was hard to see more than a few feet in, and the shadows seemed to shift and move. I kept thinking about what I'd seen, and my mind went back to 1999. I was younger then, living in a different part of Georgia, but it was a similar situation. I was out camping with some friends, and late one night, I saw something in the trees, a tall, dark figure watching us from a distance. We all saw it, but no one talked about it afterward. It changed how I looked at the woods, made me realize that there are things out there we don't understand. After that, I started paying more attention to the sounds at night, the way animals behave. And I've always had this nagging feeling that we're not alone out here. Back in the present, I stood by the fence for what felt like forever, just staring into the trees. The Yorkie had followed me out, but he stayed close to my legs, his body tense. He kept sniffing the air and letting out little growls, like he could still sense something. I finally forced myself to go back inside, locking the door behind me. I drew the curtains, even though it was still light out, and sat back on the couch. The TV was still on, but I muted it, just listening. Every little noise made me jump, the creak of the house settling, the wind rustling the trees outside. I kept replaying the sighting in my head, trying to make sense of it. How could something that big move so fast? Why did it come so close to the house? And why did it vanish like that? The rest of the evening dragged on. I didn't eat much, just picked at some leftovers, and I kept getting up to check the windows. My dogs were on edge too. The Yorkie wouldn't leave my side, and the other one stayed hidden. As it got darker, I turned on all the lights in the house, but it didn't help much. I felt exposed, like whatever was out there could be watching me right now. I thought about setting up cameras or something, but I don't have the money for that, and part of me doesn't want to know what I might catch. Now, hours later, I'm sitting here writing this, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there. My patio area, I always keep an eye on it now, even before this happened, because of the 99 incident. But today made it worse. I'm uneasy, like I'm waiting for something to happen. The fear is real, not like in movies where it's all jump scares and dramatic music. This is the kind of fear that sits in your gut, that makes you double-check the locks and sleep with one eye open. I don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't human. And I know it was big and fast and gone in a blink. And that's what scares me the most, the not knowing. The idea that it could come back any time and I might not be ready. I'm just going to end this here because I'm getting worked up again and my hands are starting to shake. I still don't have any answers and I doubt I ever will. Story 17. See, a few weeks before this particular night, my stepdad had brought his tape recorder out there. He liked to record the sounds of the woods at night, the crickets and frogs, said it helped him relax. But one time, we played the tape back, and there was this sound on it. It wasn't an animal we knew. It was low, guttural, like a growl, but with this weird, almost warbling quality to it. We played it for some old-timers at the local diner, guys who'd hunted these woods their whole lives. They just shook their heads, looked at each other and said they'd never heard anything like it. One of them, a man named Carl, with hands like leather, just said, "Boy, there's things in these hills best left alone." We kinda laughed it off. But it stuck with you, you know? It planted a seed, so that night we were set up on the bank. It was a weeknight, so there was nobody else around for miles. The air was thick and humid, the kind where your t-shirt sticks to your back. The only light came from our lantern, casting a wobbly yellow circle on the dark water, and the stars were sharp and clear overhead. We'd been there a couple of hours, not talking much, just listening to the water lap at the shore and the occasional plunk of a fishing line. Then the noises started. At first, it was just the usual stuff. A rustle in the bushes, probably a raccoon or a possum. We didn't pay it any mind, but then it got closer and the rustling turned into something heavier. It wasn't a scurry, it was a crunch, like something big was walking, deliberately stepping on dry leaves and snapping twigs. It was coming from the ridge behind us, a steep, wooded slope that climbed up from the back of the lake. My stepdad shushed us. We all froze, our lines forgotten in the water. The sound stopped for a minute, and it was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. Then it started again, closer this time, a low thump, then another. Something was moving parallel to the ridge, just inside the tree line, staying out of sight. My brother, he was the one who whispered, "What is that?" My stepdad didn't answer. He just reached slowly for the big flashlight we kept for untangling lines, this heavy metal mag light. He clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the base of the ridge, over ferns and fallen logs. For a second there was nothing. Then he swung it up a little higher, into the thicker trees, and that's when we saw them, a pair of eyes. They were about, I don't know, maybe 8 feet off the ground, way higher than a deer's would be, and they weren't reflecting white or green like an animal's. They were glowing, this deep, fiery orange color, like 2 hot coals, just burning in the darkness. They weren't moving. They were just fixed on us. My whole body went cold. It wasn't a fear I'd ever felt before. It was a deep, primal dread that started in my gut and just flooded out to my fingers and toes. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a person. This was something else. My stepdad let out a sharp, choked sound, like he'd been punched. He kept the light on the eyes, and they didn't blink, didn't waver, they just stared. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. My brother was gripping my arm so hard it hurt, but I couldn't even tell him to stop. "Get in the van," my stepdad said, and his voice was low and tight with a fear I'd never heard in him before. He was a tough guy, an ex-Marine. He didn't scare easy. We didn't need to be told twice. We moved fast, but we weren't running. It was like we were all afraid that if we made any sudden loud moves, it would trigger whatever that thing was to come charging out of the woods. We scrambled, grabbing our fishing poles, the cooler, the tackle box. We weren't neat about it. We were just throwing everything toward the open side door of the van, a beat-up old Chevy van we called the Green Machine. The whole time, my stepdad kept that flashlight beam trained on those orange eyes. They never moved. They just watched us. I could feel them on me, this intense, intelligent stare that felt like a physical weight. I remember my hands were shaking so bad I could barely fold up one of the camp chairs. I fumbled it, and it clattered on the ground, and the sound was like a gunshot in the silence. I flinched, expecting the thing to come barreling down the hill. We finally got everything piled into the van. My stepdad was the last one in. He backed toward the door, still holding the light on the ridge, and then he practically fell inside, yanking the sliding door shut with a loud bang. The sound echoed. For a second, we all just sat there in the dark van, panting. The only light was from the dashboard. I was in the passenger seat. My brother was right behind me, and my stepdad was in the driver's seat, his hands clenched on the wheel. "Keys," my brother whispered, his voice cracking. My stepdad fumbled in his pocket, found them, and jammed them into the ignition. The engine turned over, and the headlights blazed on, illuminating the dirt track in front of us. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. He threw it into reverse, and we started backing up, the tires spinning in the gravel, trying to turn around to head back down the narrow road to the main highway. We were maybe 50 feet from where we'd been parked, just getting the van pointed in the right direction, when it happened. Bang! It was a massive, deafening sound like a sledgehammer hitting the roof right above our heads. The whole van shuddered with the impact. I swear I felt the roof metal dent inward, my head jerked up, and I let out a yell I didn't even know I had in me. My brother screamed. The van swerved as my stepdad flinched, and he had to fight to keep us on the road. "What the hell was that?" my brother shouted, his voice high and thin with panic. My stepdad didn't answer. He just stomped on the gas. The van lurched forward, bouncing violently down the rutted dirt road. We were all looking at each other, eyes wide, hearts hammering. Something had hit the roof, something big. We drove for maybe another 30 seconds, the van rattling and shaking, before my stepdad slammed on the brakes. We skidded to a halt in the middle of the dirt road. "We have to see what that was," he said, and his voice was trembling. "No, just go!" my brother begged from the back, but my stepdad was already opening his door. He grabbed the big mag light again. I didn't want to, but I got out with him. My brother stayed in the van, peering out the window, his face pale in the dashboard light. The woods were silent again, eerily silent. All the crickets and frogs had stopped. My stepdad shone the light up at the roof of the van. There, right in the center, was a rock. It wasn't a pebble. It wasn't even a small stone. It was a rock, the size of a cantaloupe, maybe bigger. It was a rough, jagged piece of sandstone, the kind that was common in the ridges around there. It was just sitting there, right on the roof, as if someone had carefully placed it there. But we were moving, we were driving away. We were going at least 10, 15 miles an hour when it hit. Nobody could have thrown a rock that big and that heavy with enough force to make that sound, to make the whole van shake and have it just land neatly on the roof. It was impossible. It would have bounced, rolled off. This thing looked like it had been dropped straight down from a great height. My stepdad reached up and touched it. He tried to move it. It was heavy. He had to use both hands to shove it off the roof. It landed in the dirt with a solid final thud. We just stared at it, lying there in the beam of the flashlight. The proof. The impossible proof. And that's when we heard the other sound. It came from the woods, not from the direction of the lake, but from the other side of the road, deeper into the darkness. It was a sound, but not a word. It was muffled, like it was coming from behind something. It was low, guttural, a series of grunts and clicks that didn't form any language I'd ever heard. but it had a pattern to it. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound curious. It just sounded communicative, like something was talking, but not to us. Or maybe it was. It was completely unintelligible, but it was deliberate. That sound, more than the eyes, more than the rock, chilled me to the bone. The eyes were a threat. The rock was a display of power. But that sound, that was a mind. That was something with thoughts. Something that was maybe trying to figure us out, or was just letting us know it was still there, watching. We didn't say a word. We scrambled back into the van, locked the doors, and my stepdad floored it. We didn't stop until we were on the paved road, and then we didn't stop until we saw the lights of the first gas station. We never looked back. We never went back to that lake. Not ever. We talked about it sometimes in hushed tones, but we never really figured it out. We never reported it to the police. What would we say? A big rock fell on our van. They'd have thought we were crazy. But I know what we saw. I know what we heard. Those orange eyes burning in the dark, the impossible weight of that rock hitting the roof, and that strange, muffled, clicking speech from the woods. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hoax. It was something that lived in those deep Tennessee hills, something that didn't want us there. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up sometimes even now, all these years later, is the feeling that it wasn't just a random angry monster. It felt calculated. The rock wasn't thrown at the van to smash the windshield to hurt us. It was placed on the roof. It was a message, and to this day I have no idea what that message was supposed to be. Story 18. I was 9 years old. I woke up that morning not to my mom's usual gentle shaking, but to a sound, a pacing. Heavy, quick steps on the bare floorboards. I opened my eyes and squinted in the dim light. It was my dad. He was walking from the kitchen doorway to the front window and back again, a tight, frantic path. In his right hand, he held a hay hook. I knew what it was because he'd shown it to me in the barn the day before. This heavy, curved piece of iron used for moving bales. He was gripping it so tight, his knuckles were white. Then I heard another sound. A soft, hitching cry. I turned my head and saw my mum. She was sitting on a rolled-up rug, her back against the wall, holding my baby sister Sarah, who was maybe 6 months old. Mom had one hand pressed over Sarah's ear and the other over her own mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. Her face was wet and pale. My stomach just dropped. This was all wrong. This wasn't the happy adventure from last night, roasting marshmallows in the fireplace. This was something else, something bad. The air in the room felt heavy, like before a storm. My dad saw I was awake. He stopped his pacing and came over to me, his boots loud on the floor. He didn't look scared exactly. He looked hard. His jaw was set, and his eyes had a kind of fierce, dark intensity I'd never seen before. "Son," he said, his voice low and rough, "I need you to get up. I need you to look out that window and tell me what you see." I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, my heart starting to thump hard against my ribs. The floor was cold under my bare feet. I went to the big front window, the one that looked out over County Road 28. Dad stood right behind me, so close I could feel the heat coming off him. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Look down the road," he whispered, "toward the bridge." I wiped a patch of condensation from the glass with the heel of my hand and looked. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the gravel road, the overgrown ditches on either side, the line of trees in the distance. The sun was behind the house, so the road was still in shadow. And then I saw it. A figure, way down where the road started to dip toward the creek and the little bridge. It was walking on 2 legs. It was tall, so impossibly tall, and it was just a solid, dark shape against the gray of the morning. It was black, or a very, very dark brown, and it was covered in hair, not fur like a dog, but long, shaggy hair that swayed with its movement. It had a shape like a man, a massive, broad-shouldered man, but it was all wrong. The proportions were off. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees as it walked. Its head was set forward on a thick, powerful neck. It was just walking calmly, purposefully, down the middle of the gravel road, heading away from our house. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I just stared. "See it?" my dad asked, his voice tight. I managed a nod, my eyes glued to the window. It was getting closer to the bridge. The bridge had wooden rails. I remembered crossing it in the truck when we first looked at the property. My dad had said they were about 6 feet high. As the thing reached the bridge, it didn't break its stride. It just stepped onto the wooden planks and kept going, and that's when the scale of it hit me. Its head rose a solid 2 feet above the top of that 6-foot bridge rail. My 9-year-old brain did the math. 6 plus 2 is 8. It was 8 feet tall, maybe more. The reality of that size was like a physical blow. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk like that, and they sure as hell aren't 8 feet tall standing up. This was something else, something that shouldn't be. It moved with a strange, fluid grace for something so huge. There was no lumbering, no clumsiness, just a steady, powerful stride. Each step covered so much ground. It was almost at the far side of the bridge now. And then my dad moved. He took his hand off my shoulder, and in one fluid motion, he was at the front door, yanking it open. The old wooden door screeched on its hinges. "Stay with your mother," he barked. But he didn't wait for an answer. He was out on the porch, the hay hook still clenched in his fist. I didn't stay. I couldn't. A terror unlike anything I'd ever known was mixing with a burning, desperate curiosity. I had to see. I had to know. I darted after him, my bare feet slapping on the cold wooden porch, and then the sharp gravel of the driveway. The morning air was cool and damp, smelling of wet earth and clover. The world was so quiet, so normal, except for this thing walking away from us. My dad was standing at the edge of the road, just staring. I came up beside him, my whole body trembling. We watched as the figure reached the end of the bridge and stepped off onto the road on the other side. It didn't slow down. It didn't turn its head. It just kept walking toward the thick line of woods that marked the edge of our new property. I got a better look at it now, out in the open air, without the window glass between us. The hair wasn't just one color, it was a mix of dark browns and blacks, matted in places, longer on its shoulders and arms. The muscles in its back and legs bunched and shifted with each step. I could hear the faint crunch of gravel under its feet. They were big, dark, and I couldn't see toes, just a solid shape. It was the sheer mass of it. It made the trees on the side of the road look smaller. It blotted out the space it occupied. It reached the tree line without a pause, without even breaking its stride. It stepped off the road between 2 big oak trees and was gone, just like that. 1 second it was there, a colossal, impossible shape in the morning light, and the next, the woods had swallowed it whole. It never looked back, not once. We stood there for a full minute, maybe 2, just staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The woods were silent. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered. It was a dead, empty silence. My dad finally let out a long, shaky breath. I looked up at him. The hard look was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, bewildered confusion. He looked down at the hay hook in his hand, as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. "Come on," he said, his voice hoarse. He put his arm around me and turned us back toward the house. My mom was standing in the doorway, Sarah still clutched to her chest, her face a mask of fear and relief. Back inside, the house felt different, smaller. The adventure was over, replaced by a cold, settling dread. My dad went straight to the kitchen sink and poured himself a glass of water. His hand was shaking so bad the water sloshed over the rim. None of us said anything. What was there to say? After a while, maybe an hour later, my dad got his boots on. He took his shotgun from the truck and told us to lock the door and not open it for anyone but him. He was going to go look. My mom and I sat in the living room, not talking, just listening. The house was so quiet, we could hear the old clock ticking on the mantel. I kept looking out the window, expecting to see that dark shape coming back up the road. My skin felt cold and prickly. He was gone for a long time. When he finally came back, his boots and the cuffs of his pants were wet with dew. He looked tired. He leaned the shotgun by the door and shook his head. "Nothing," he said. "Not a damn thing." He'd walked all the way to the bridge. He'd searched the ground on both sides of the road. He'd gone into the woods where it had disappeared. He said the ground was soft there, perfect for leaving tracks. But there were no tracks, no broken branches, no hair snagged on a bush. Nothing. It was as if the thing had never been there at all. That was the worst part, I think. The complete lack of evidence. It made the whole thing feel like a shared nightmare. But the terror was real. The memory of its size, the way it moved, was burned into my brain. We packed up our camping stuff and drove into town that afternoon. We didn't talk about it in the car. We just didn't. We stayed in a motel that night, and the next day we went back to the farmhouse. Life had to go on. But it was never the same. My dad, he just closed up. He'd always been a talker, full of stories. After that morning, he became quieter. If I ever tried to bring it up even years later, he'd just get a closed-off look on his face and change the subject. He refused to ever talk about it. It was like a door had been slammed shut and locked inside him. My mom, she was different. She never denied it. Once, when I was a teenager and asked her if she remembered that morning, she just got a sad, distant look in her eyes and said, "Yes, we all saw something that day." That was it. But she admitted it. She didn't try to explain it away or pretend it was a bear. We lived on that farm for another 8 years. I walked and biked down County Road 28, over that same bridge, thousands of times. I played in those woods. I never saw anything like it again. No strange sounds, no footprints, no glimpses of dark shapes between the trees. But I always looked, every single time. A part of me was braced for it. Every rustle in the bushes, every snap of a twig, my heart would jump into my throat for a second. That single sighting was the entirety of our encounter. It didn't throw rocks. It didn't vocalize. It didn't come near the house. It just walked down our road in the early morning and vanished into the woods. And that's what haunts me, even now, all these decades later. Not some dramatic Hollywood chase, it's the calmness of it, the utter normality of its walk, like it was just going about its business, the way it never even acknowledged us. Two humans standing there watching it, one of them armed. We were so insignificant to it, it was just passing through. The memory of that massive, black, hairy figure moving with that easy, powerful gait, its head clearing the bridge rail by 2 feet, walking away and never looking back. It's etched into me. It's a cold spot in my memory that never warms up. My dad's gone now, and my mom is getting older, and I'm the only one left who really thinks about it, who turns it over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of it. I never can. It was just there, and then it was gone, and nothing was ever the same again. Story 19. It was one of those sticky July afternoons in Greenville County where the air feels like wet cotton and the cicadas buzz so loud you can't hear yourself think. I was 14 that summer, all bony elbows and 2 big feet, and I'd ridden my bike over to my friend's house after school let out. His place was way out past the old textile mill, where the neighborhoods petered out and the woods took over. A thick wall of pine and oak that ran right down to the river. His dad had built the house himself, a sturdy brick thing that always smelled like sawdust and pipe tobacco. We were in the den, the one with the wood-paneled walls and the shag carpet the color of dried mustard. The window unit, AC, was chugging away, fighting a losing battle against the South Carolina heat. We were sprawled on the floor, surrounded by empty cans of Pepsi and a half-eaten bag of Doritos, watching this grainy documentary about Bigfoot on his dad's big console TV. It was one of those cheaply made things with a lot of dramatic reenactments and blurry photos that were probably just guys in hairy suits. But to a couple of kids with overactive imaginations, it was terrifying. We were getting goosebumps, the good kind, the kind you get when you're safe inside and the scary stuff is just on the screen. I remember the documentary had just gotten to a part where some guy was talking about hearing these unearthly screams in the Pacific Northwest when we heard it. A real one. It wasn't from the TV. It came from outside, from the direction of the river. It's hard to describe a sound that gets inside your bones. This wasn't an animal sound I knew. It wasn't a bobcat's shriek or a fox's cry. This was a scream, high-pitched and wavering, but with a raw, guttural power behind it that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It was long, too. It just went on and on, cutting through the drone of the cicadas and the hum of the air conditioner like a siren of pure wrongness. It didn't sound like it came from a throat. It sounded like it was ripped from something. My friend and I just froze, looking at each other with our eyes wide. The Dorito I was holding halfway to my mouth just crumbled in my fingers. The documentary narrator was still droning on, but his voice was just background noise now. All we could hear was that scream echoing away into the woods, leaving a silence that felt heavier and more threatening than the sound itself. A few seconds later, his dad came into the den, wiping his hands on an oily rag. He'd been tinkering with the lawnmower in the garage. "You boys hear that?" he asked, his voice low and serious. He had that look on his face, the one adults get when they're trying not to show they're worried. We just nodded, not trusting ourselves to speak. He walked over to the window and peered out into the deepening twilight. Sounded like it came from down by the river. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to us. "Grab your shoes. We're going to go take a quick look." My stomach did a flip. Go out there? After that? But his dad was already heading to the hall closet. He came back with a big, heavy metal flashlight, the kind that feels like a club, and his hunting rifle, a bolt action .3006. Seeing him with the gun made it real. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a documentary. We put our sneakers on, our hands fumbling with the laces. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. His dad clicked on the flashlight, and the bright beam cut a swath through the darkening living room. "Stay close behind me," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and be quiet." We stepped out onto the back porch. The air was still thick and hot, and the smell of honeysuckle was overwhelming. The woods were a solid black wall about 50 yards from the house. The only sounds were our footsteps on the gravel path and the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. His dad led the way, the flashlight beam sweeping back and forth across the path ahead of us. It illuminated the tall grass, the gnarly roots of old oaks, and countless dancing moths. The path sloped down towards the river, and with every step, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was a physical pressure, like a weight on the back of my neck. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something looming out of the shadows behind us. My friend was right beside me, and I could hear his ragged breathing. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The shared terror was a language of its own. We reached the edge of the tree line. The river was just ahead, a dark, sluggish ribbon. You could hear more than see, a soft, gurgling undercurrent to the silence. His dad stopped, holding up a hand for us to halt. He swept the flashlight beam slowly across the dense undergrowth that bordered the water. The beam caught the shiny leaves of poison ivy, the pale bark of a sycamore, the dark, tangled mass of a blackberry thicket. Everything was still. Then the beam hit something, and it stopped. It was about 30 yards away, deep in the brush, where the trees grew close together. At first, I thought it was just two spots of water reflecting the light, but they were too high off the ground, maybe 7 or 8 feet up. And they were the wrong color. They weren't white or yellow. They were a dull, glowing red, like two burning coals. They were eyes. They didn't blink. They just stared, unwavering, right into the beam of the flashlight. They weren't the eyes of a deer or a raccoon. They were too far apart, and the height was all wrong. A cold dread, colder than any ice, washed over me. My legs felt like they were made of water. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. His dad didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen. The flashlight held steady on those two red points of light. The only thing that moved was the slight tremor in the beam of light, betraying the shake in his hand. Then the thing moved. We didn't see a body. It was too dark, too deep in the brush, but we heard it, a heavy, solid weight shifting, and then came the sound. Crack. It wasn't a twig snapping. It was a tree limb, a thick one. The sound was sharp and brutal, like a gunshot in the quiet. It was the sound of pure, casual strength, something that could break a man in half without even trying. That sound broke the spell. His dad let out a strangled gasp. "Run," he whispered, and then he yelled it. "Run! Back to the house now!" He didn't have to tell us twice. We spun around and sprinted. It wasn't a run. It was a blind, panicked flight. I don't think my feet even touched the ground. The flashlight beam jerked and bounced wildly as his dad ran with us, illuminating flashes of the path, a root, a rock, a startled frog. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my lungs burning, my legs pumping, fueled by a terror so complete it wiped out every other thought. I could hear it behind us. Not footsteps, but the sound of the forest being pushed aside, a crashing, tearing noise, like something huge and powerful was moving through the brush, keeping pace with us just inside the tree line. It wasn't running after us, not exactly. It was just moving, fast. We burst out of the tree line and into the backyard. The light from the porch seemed like a holy beacon. We didn't stop until we were up the steps, across the porch, and through the back door. His dad slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt, his chest heaving. He leaned against the door for a second, then rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness, the rifle held tight in his hands. My friend and I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. I was trembling so hard my teeth were chattering. The safe, familiar den now felt like a flimsy cardboard box. And then the screaming started again. It was closer this time, much closer, right at the edge of the yard. That same high, piercing, guttural scream. It wasn't a warning. It felt like a declaration, a promise. It went on for what felt like minutes, shredding the night air, vibrating through the walls of the house. It would stop for a few minutes, just long enough for you to think it was over, to let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Then it would start again from a slightly different spot, sometimes from the left side of the house, sometimes from the right. It felt like it was circling us. We didn't sleep. None of us. We sat in the den with all the lights on. His dad sat in his armchair with the rifle across his lap, staring at the door. We didn't talk. There was nothing to say. We just listened to that horrible sound over and over for hours. It was a sound of pure, undiluted rage and intelligence. It knew we were in here. It knew it had us trapped. The documentary was still playing on the TV, the tape having reached the end and auto-rewound, but the sound was muted. We didn't need fake horror. We had the real thing right outside our door. Sometime after 2 in the morning, the screaming finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost as bad. We stayed awake until the sun came up, until the grey morning light filtered through the windows and painted the room in weak, safe colours. His dad was the first to move. He stood up, his joints cracking, and walked slowly to the back door. He unlocked it and stepped out onto the porch, the rifle still in his hand. My friend and I followed, huddling in the doorway. The backyard was quiet. The birds were chirping. It looked perfectly normal, but it felt different. The air felt charged, violated. We followed his dad down the path to the river, our steps slow and hesitant. We got to the spot where we'd seen the eyes. The ground was soft from a rain a couple of days before, and there, in the mud, was a single footprint. It wasn't a bear print. I'd seen bear tracks before. This was different. It was huge, longer than my dad's work boot and twice as wide. The toes were distinct, and the arch was pronounced. It looked almost human, but impossibly large. Just the one print, clear as day, pressed deep into the earth. Then we saw the other things. A grapevine as thick as my wrist, one that had stretched between two trees for as long as I could remember, was snapped clean in half. The broken ends white and fresh. On a nearby pine tree, about 7 feet up, long strips of bark had been torn off, leaving deep parallel gouges in the wood underneath. They weren't claw marks from a cat or scratches from a buck. They were too big, too deep, like something had just hooked its fingers into the bark and ripped it away. We just stood there, looking at the footprint, the broken vine, the scarred tree. The evidence was laid out in front of us, undeniable. The goosebumps from the documentary were nothing compared to the cold, hard certainty that settled in my stomach. We hadn't just heard something in the woods. Something had heard us, something had seen us, and it had let us know for hours that it was right there. We never talked about it much after that. His dad just said, "Some things are better left alone," and that was that. We didn't go down to the river for the rest of the summer. I'd ride my bike home before dark every day after that. But I still think about it, especially on hot July nights. I think about those red eyes in the beam of the flashlight just staring. I think about the sound of that tree limb snapping like a toothpick. And I think about that scream, a sound that didn't belong in this world, a sound that has echoed in the back of my mind for all these years. We didn't find Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot found us, and I know, with a certainty that still chills my blood, that it could have come right through the walls of that house if it had really wanted to.